You better be listening to Sleazoids or I must break you.
The next 120 seconds bring you more action and excitement than most people experience in a lifetime.
Who are you running away from now?
Running? Me? Now, you know me better than that.
3 days and 3 nights and not a word from
Well, I've been very busy.
All I knew, you were lying in the gutter somewhere with a knife in your back.
But we happen to know I'm your star pupil. Because I reflect back to you your own talent. I'd hate to take a bite of you. You're a cookie full of arsenic.
Don't turn your back on him. You might find a knife in it.
We're friends, Javi. We go as far back as when you were a fresh kid congressman, don't we?
Why is it that everything you say sounds like a threat?
You got it all. But you're a dead man, Annie Samuel. A dead man.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Sleazoids, the podcast where we go down the rabbit hole of 20th century genre fare from the most influential canon classics to the trashiest exploitation films we can get our hands on, and invite you to tag along in helping us create a canon of sleaze. Each week is a double feature Grindhouse style where we discuss 2 films loosely related by subject, genre, actor, filmmaker, or franchise, and at the end of each episode, along with our honorary Sleazoids, which you can become by subscribing on Patreon.
He's a cop and he's feeling violent. We're finally going Kitano mode, everybody. Join the sleaze.
We decide on all the official ratings and rankings for every film that we cover. Patreon subscribers also get an on-air shout-out and 2 bonus episodes every single month, which we have been doing for, I don't even know how long, 3 years, coming up on 4 years probably.
Yeah, wow.
Which is nuts. I'm getting my years confused too. I don't even know if that's right. There's like 90 plus bonus episodes, almost 100 bonus episodes waiting for you. And even more if you include our bonus transmission series where we talk about new release films. And we just did one where we were talking about Dune and Last Duel. That was like over 3 hours long. Yeah. So if you have any interest in that, patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast. And speaking of which, we have a lot of patrons to thank this week.
Awesome.
And they are El Repugnant, friend of the pod, Alex Acton Jones,
nice.
Who upped his pledge to $10.
Oh, thank you, Alex.
Nick B. Alex. I thought he already was at $10. Maybe he dropped for a little bit.
Were we giving it to him for free?
Alex was coming to the virtual screenings that we do once a month, which, by the way, at the time that you guys are listening to this, it's Noirvember still. So I think either this week or next week, by the time you guys are listening to this, check out the Patreon to see which date exactly we're going to be watching Detour. So look forward to that. We also had Alex Walsh, who upgraded his from $5 to $10 and who is going to be joining us for Detour this month. So thanks to Alex, both Alexes. Nick B, who pledged at the annual rate and signed up for a whole year of the show. So thanks to Nick, David Gestson, Daniel Olson. Oh, you guys. Everyone makes fun of my pronunciations in the Discord, and at some point I'm going to get Jamie to do this because, okay.
Or just give me all the hard names.
Ubarlin Gizbar. I'm sure that was brutalized, but thank you. Devin Ogaz, Adam T, and Robert Masalik. Thanks to all of those new signees. Hope you guys are enjoying all of the bonus episodes. Thanks for supporting the show. The other plug is Apple Podcasts. If you guys are listening on Apple Podcasts, and I see the stats, I know that you are. I see you right now listening. Scroll down to the bottom. Give us a good old rating and review down there. It helps us climb the ranks at iTunes and find new listeners. And a lot of you actually have been doing the ratings and reviews recently. Awesome. I know I say it every week, but people have been doing it recently. So keep it up. Thanks so much.
Yeah, it really helps.
And then the last plug, as always, is merch. If you guys like the poster art that local Toronto horror artist Trevor Henderson did for the show, you can get that put on basically anything you can think of. And it's the holiday season. Think about it.
Yeah.
Your grandkid wants a hoodie, and they want the hoodie with the Sleazoids logo on it. The link is in the description, as well as over at sleazoidspodcast.com for anyone interested. But that is the intro. It has really become a mouthful. Welcome back to another week. As always, I am your host, Josh Lewis, and joining me also, as always, is my co-host,
Jamie Miller. Welcome back, everybody.
Welcome. I think 2 weeks ago would have been the last time you guys, free listeners, would have heard from us, and we would have been talking with special returning guest Jason Bailey, and he brought on with him because he has just finished his book on New York City cinema and the movies that made the city, according to him, called Fun City Cinema. And so because we were in the thick of Noirvember and he was gonna, sort of kick it off for us, he wanted to bring on a movie called The Window, 1949, and a sort of an update on the same premise, which is of a child witnessing a murder and finding themselves in peril as a result. Larry Cohen's Perfect Strangers from 1984, which is more of, a more 80s synth, more erotic kind of thriller. A
very Cohen movie.
Yes, versus The Window, which is, a more traditional noir. The director behind that shot Hitchcock's film, Notorious. So that's more of the vibe that you're kind of leaning there. But little Bobby Driscoll, what a performance in that film as the little boy who witnesses a murder and then has every adult in his life tell him that he's a liar.
Oh, it's great.
Yeah, so if you didn't check out that episode, that was on any podcast listener of choice. That was the episode 2 weeks ago. And then last week, we had a very special episode. We moved our setting from New York to a very different city, and we moved over to London. And we saw what was happening in crime cinema across the pond, especially here in the 1980s, doing neo-noirs. We talked about The Long Good Friday from 1980 and Mona Lisa from 1986, both films starring Bob Hoskins. It was our first time talking about him on the show.
He's unreal.
And both performances were incredible and very different kinds of roles that he has to play, despite the fact that he is a very short, barrel-chested, receding hairline, ball of anger,
which he uses to his advantage in both movies somehow. It's pretty awesome.
One, he's powerful and violent, and in the other one, he's a little bit more vulnerable and kind of sweet. But yeah, both
still has the violent outbursts, of course, but a little more sweet, yeah.
Yeah. But both very, very good films. And yeah, it was a lot of fun talking about those. We ended up doing a pretty long episode on those films, I think, both because they kind of surprised. I wouldn't say I was surprised by how much I liked them. I definitely heard that they were quite good, but they still kind of shocked me how much I liked them, especially Bob Hoskins. But patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast. That was last week's bonus episode for Noirvember. But moving on, we have a special returning guest joining us this week to continue Noirvember. And I kind of thought of him because he kind of mentioned it a little bit while we had him on the last episode that, he was really into these kinds of movies. And so he's someone who I thought about like the second I was plotting it out. And that is some of our listeners will be familiar from him on Twitter at MinovskyArticle. But that is Casey. Casey, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great, and I'm glad to be back. I am sorry that I missed the week of the Beast Bob Hoskins.
Yes.
As you have said, those are two of the best crime movies ever made. But I am delighted to be here with you today talking about film noir.
Yeah, well, it was interesting because, obviously our first episode was in New York, and then our second episode was in London, and then here you are bringing with you London and New York. Once again, we can't leave these cities. This is just where all crime happens.
That's right.
But also, it was very funny because when you initially asked me like what film or pitched which films you wanted to bring, I can't remember. Was it Long Good Friday or Mona Lisa was the film?
It was Long Good Friday that I had brought, and you said, actually, we just booked that one like seconds before I asked you. So
yeah, and it was so funny because it was like it was the episode right before your episode too. So it was very funny. I don't think I've ever had anyone ask me to do a movie that we had put in like right on the other side of their episode that we were asking them to be a part of.
It's okay though, because I'm still thrilled to talk about the two that we are going to talk about today.
Absolutely. And Casey, as the show goes, the guests bring on the films with them. So what are those films that you brought with you today?
So the parameters you gave me were very simply, you just wanted to talk about some classic noir films. And I know that, you all have discussed a lot of neo-noir recently, so I wanted to stick to like that classical period. So I picked 2 from the 50s. As you said, one is set in New York, one is set in London. But I wanted to pick movies that went outside of what a lot of people expect noir to be, in the way that a lot of people's view of noir is that it's about private detectives and gangsters and things of that nature. So I wanted to pick 2 that had nothing really to do with those topics, but were still very much within the noir mold. So I chose 1950s Night and the City and 1957's Sweet Smell of Success. And I chose these for a few reasons. The first was that they are both films about shameless self-promoters who are desperately working within the promotional business, and the ways that their various schemes tear their lives and the lives of everyone around them apart. And also, there are 2 films that would not exist without the rise of McCarthyism and the House of Un-American Affairs Committee.
Yeah, I read that especially about Night in the City, where he was Jules Dassin, who directed that, was actually blacklisted himself, and partially why the film is made in London and not in probably not in New York.
Yeah, without that situation, sending Jules Dassin out of America and to London, we would have never even gotten his most iconic movie, Rafifi, a few years later.
Yeah, no,
this
of course.
is a pivotal step toward a lot of noir developments. And yeah, it's also, I had wrongly assumed for a long time that Dassin was French because of Rafifi, but no, he's just an American guy from New York.
Just one of the most famous French crime films was just directed by an American. Just something funny to think about. But yeah, we'll definitely get into all of that when we jump into Night in the City, which I think we are going to do right now. Let's do it.
Tosser, you Judas! Harry! Harry, go back! Turn me in! Cut my throat for 1,000 quid! Go back, Harry! I'll get help!
All right, we are talking Night and the City, the 1950 film noir directed by Jules Dassin and starring Richard Widmark, who's someone we've actually talked about before, and I'm glad we have another chance to kind of talk about him because we previously talked about Pick Up on South Street, Sam Fuller,
great movie.
on the show. I think we did that last Noirvember, and it was cool seeing him there. Also playing, I think he's a pickpocket in that film. He's a great thief.
That was another movie I had considered mentioning, but I saw that you'd already done it. It could have been very well have been a Widmark double feature because
a Widmark double feature. No, it would have been a good one.
He's one of the heroes of film noir that I don't think gets enough attention now.
Yeah, no, he has a very strange kind of sensibility to him as a performer because he's really not like a Bogart. He's not he's not particularly even someone like Bogart. I guess you could argue he's not necessarily the most traditionally handsome man who's ever been in film. He has some stark features to him, but there's something very sweaty and unromantic about making Richard Widmark your leading man. He doesn't quite have that suave charm to him in a way. He always feels like he's kind of slimy in a way, and it's perfect for a character who here and as is sort of fitting for the double feature. I think actually both performances are trying to do the same thing. The difference is that Tony Curtis was actually very charming and known for being kind of a romantic comedy kind of leading man type. But both films, are very, very ugly depictions of their leading characters. These dudes who kind of navigate the underworld and see everyone around them as a tool for their own ambition, or in the case of this film, a little bit of desperation. And then obviously the subsequent cost of thinking and kind of acting. that way. And both films very, very grim and bleak, which did kind of clarify itself to me when I realized that, Jules Dassin, he was this very young American Jewish communist filmmaker who made his way through the Hollywood system via places like RKO, who we just talked about because they were the ones who made The Window. So I think he worked for them around the same time that they were shooting The Window. And then eventually he went to MGM and became one of the more celebrated sort of workman noir filmmakers of his era, making things like Brute Force, Thieves Highway, The Naked City, which we actually just mentioned with Jason Bailey as well, because he just finished his book, obviously, on New York City cinema. And that film is actually often credited as the first movie of its kind that was shot entirely on real New York locations. So Jules Dassin was obviously, trying to get on that front, give it that authentic kind of grit and texture to it, which he does here with London. But it was funny that Jason informed us through the research in his book. He actually discovered that The Window was the first film actually shot. It was shot 1 year before The Naked City, but sat unreleased on a shelf at RKO Pictures for 2 years because Howard Hughes is a moron.
Yeah.
and he thought that the movie would bomb. Yeah. And then ended up being a huge hit. But yeah, obviously, as Casey mentioned too, Dassin would, also, go on to make one of the earliest sort of, very well-known French crime heist films, Rafifi, that would eventually inspire, filmmakers like Jean-Pierre Melville and, subsequently American crime filmmakers who were inspired by Melville, people like Walter Hill, Michael Mann.
It's actually because of Melville that Dassin got the Rafifi job. Melville recommended him for the director's seat when he couldn't do it himself.
That is very cool. Because again, we kind of partially mentioned it, but it's so crazy that, you talk about Jean-Pierre Melville, who's obviously, one of the most celebrated French crime filmmakers of all time for obvious reason. But one of the next biggest ones was directed just by this guy, this American guy and you're like, well, how the hell did that happen? And it happened because, he was blacklisted and actually blacklisted because of his politics during the production of this film. And that's the reason this film takes place in London, because he actually wasn't even allowed to step foot on the studio property that he was working for. Despite the fact that the studio still wanted him to make the film because he was already under contract and he had time to make a film. So they were like, make one for us, but also you can't come into work. Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah. His producer, Daryl Zanuck, specifically gave him a script in London and said, get out of here. Take this and go so that we can still make movies with you. But
oh, my God.
Yeah, so that is the sort of tumultuous existence of this film, and I would say on some level, that sort of cynicism that he must have felt, having to do that is kind of felt in the film. It feels like a kind of angry, kind of resentful little film in a way about a guy who is, being chased on all angles and being just absolutely swallowed by this thing that he kind of owns in his own way. He's very skilled at navigating and this underworld. And I do love the way that he decides to kind of trace it here as nothing but, because it's sort of similar to Pick Up on South Street, where it's this has a very street level view of the kind of people who pull cons and pull deals and are always trying to get a leg up on other people. And similar to Pick Up on South Street, which, we dealt with how sad that movie was in part because it was, there was a little bit of solidarity between the people who were living on the streets and who were desperate and needed to do this as a form of work. And there's a little bit of that here, I would say, but I would say that despite kind of presenting something similar, the tone of what he's presenting is a lot less, there's something so, I guess, existentially sad about in Pick Up on South Street, like Jamie, we talked about that very weary monologue that old lady who's been stealing and begging for her entire life kind of gives. There's less of a human factor to some of this, where it's every single one of these. No, you can't imagine a version of this movie that spends time with all those side characters, but there is so much instead of finding a kind of common humanity between a lot of these people who are living on the streets or in desperate financial situations, it's really, it really focuses on like the shifting alliances between the grifters.
Yeah.
Who's playing who's got what agenda, who's the person who's going down and how can the rest of us profit off of that kind of deal. That's a lot of the point of view of this.
Yeah. In the beginning too, you see there's this some shots where you see Harry just kind of interacting with people throughout the town, and you can tell he has a very like charismatic, outgoing, lively personality, and people like him and know him. But there is a big tell in every time he talks to anybody that they also don't really trust him. So he has this mode of just moving forward and, trying to work with people. But you can tell that people are pretty apprehensive to do so. Even in conversations, they come off as if they're like, yeah, we like you, you're charming, but I really don't know if trusting
we know
you would
you're
be the
bullshit at this
thing.
point.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, they make us aware very upfront that he has failed so many schemes at this point, and they're all the next big
probably where the
thing.
mistrust comes from.
And he has dragged everyone, every lowlife and somebody in London down with him at some point, and so they all have very credible reasons not to trust him.
Right.
A thing I find very interesting about Widmark's character Harry Fabian is that he is an American, but nobody really comments on that in this otherwise British cast.
Yeah.
And I did just want to pull up that I think that also might connect in some way to Dassen's experience in London.
Okay.
Yeah, I could see that.
But Widmark is, as you said, like he's this sweaty lowlife with this desperate energy. And I mean, the movie does try to anchor him a little bit with this romantic subplot with Jean Tierney, who is a woman who has and in some ways still does love him, who works at a club that he constantly tries to get the owner of into his schemes. And she kind of tries to present him a softer, more honest life, but he always she's like, I'm just going to clock in for the night shift. Why can't you just clock in for the night shift somewhere? Like, why do we need to be hurting people? Why do we need to be, constantly on the run? Like the opening of this film, right? It literally starts with him already sweaty, already panicked, being hounded for debts that he owes from who knows how many schemes ago.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and even the first interaction he has with Mary is like him trying to convince her to give him some money so that he can invest in, like, I think it's a Greyhound track of some kind.
Yes.
And so it's just another fast money making scheme that isn't probably going to work. And he even says a line too, which is very sad when we get closer to the end, where he says, "Is like, it's not like I'd ever steal from you," that kind of thing. And that definitely ends up being a lie. But just his energy in this scene, it's just he's once again he's just driven to move forward. He's never, even when he's interacting with her and she's presenting to him maybe a better life, a real relationship with somebody, he's still just kind of using it as another way to scheme. It never seems really that genuine with him a lot of the time. I still think he's more connected with Mary than anyone else, but it still feels as if he's even doing a lot of the scheming when it comes to her as well.
Oh yeah, well the way that the camera focuses on him, like immediately going into her purse, like when she's not even there, and he's like let himself in. Exactly. And then he's like, I was just looking for a cigarette, and like she immediately like grabs the box of cigarettes that's very obviously open and on the table. Like,
Yeah, and the way you see the light leave her eyes as soon as he starts another pitch, like, okay,
yeah, oh god, yeah. That's like definitely a woman who has seen that pitch literally like 20 or 30 times already, and it's always gone terrible.
Well, right. And I think that's a thing that really defines him throughout this movie, is that the Widmark character he's very interested in the pitch. He's very interested in the big idea, but he has no interest in the details. Like it's all about moving forward and being the one with the grand idea and having the attention for having the idea. But when it comes to doing any work other than scamming the next mark to give you more money, there's no real interest to that attention to detail.
Like he definitely has, an inherent skill to, being able to meet someone, immediately talk them up, immediately get them on his side.
He can read people well. Yeah.
He knows how to charm. He knows how to manipulate. And, there are sequences where you get to see him like really use his skills to his advantage and to, I guess partially his credit. He gets an inch away from, maybe for the first time actually succeeding on one of his gambits. But the issue is that the methods he has in order to do that are very thin. They're very, he's trying to build something with very shitty materials. And I like the way that Mary's the other guy who lives in Mary's apartment complex, the way that he describes Harry, I think is really, really spot on, which is he says that Harry is an artist without an art.
Yes.
And that he's groping, just always groping for the right lever and a means to express himself. And that really is kind of the desperation you feel. It reminded me a little bit of something like Pickpocket, the Robert Bresson film, because part of that film and what's so well crafted about it is that, the character in that film who is a pickpocket, you get so swept up in like his actual skill at pickpocketing. They're so intense when he pulls off, when he pulls off a maneuver, you're like, yes, oh my God, like the way the filmmaking gets you into it. But also, him doing that is, what ends up getting him into prison and into trouble when there was, another life was possible. So this kind of has a similar structure to it where it's like you kind of get, based on the scenes where he is manipulating people, that he has found something he's good at, and what person wouldn't want to continue doing something they're really good at. But at the same time, what he's good at is literally his tragic downfall. And he can't see that.
Everyone else he meets in the movie has a trade of some kind. They're all doing something that anchors them. I mean, even the neighbor you mentioned that calls him an artist without an art makes ceramic elephants to sell to a shop, or he hangs out with, he meets a counterfeiter, or he meets a...
Yeah, I love that montage where he's going around looking for someone to give him 200 quid for the scheme that we'll get into. But, he finds a dude who like leads the panhandlers. He finds a dude who forges documents.
Even the panhandler guy says, I will lend you some folks to panhandle on your behalf. You just have to manage them. And he's not interested.
He's like, no, I can't get the money fast enough. So he's in it for a quick buck. And there's the woman who trades in nylons and cigarettes, which I thought was funny too. Yeah, you're right. Everyone kind of has their own working trade to them that they are willing to hone, and they, have clearly spent the time, and, that's how they're able to get a profit. And even people say to him, they're like, do you know what 200 quid is? Do you know how much work and time I have to put in to kind of get that? And you just, expect me to like cough that over to you and stuff because he's trying to get a deal to do with this wrestler.
Because if you've always been able to talk some mark into giving you 200 quid, there is no time accumulated. It's just as fast as someone handing it to you.
Exactly. And that's what he's looking for. He's not willing, like Mary, to go work at a club, or tend bar, or even if he wants to do it in the criminal enterprise, he could work with the forger. The forger would give him some money.
It's almost ironic because I think he also has this feeling of not wanting to have a boss in some way, like he's his own man. But this ends all these schemes end up becoming him working for all of these people instead of just like one person. So I found that kind of funny too, and he never really realizes it because he's going from one scheme to the next. But it's just like, dude, all you're doing is just having a different boss every single day. For every scheme, there's a boss, someone that you have to call to. So it's that I find kind of ironic.
Yeah,
and funny
it's like don't you want to work where like frantically evading capture and danger is not like a normal everyday
a weekly occurrence? Yeah,
like instead of just running around sweating everywhere, you just kind of you clock in.
Right, exactly, and it seems to like eventually you have that scene where he uses the wrestler's psychology to instigate the fight, and so it's kind of seeming like his understanding of people work out for him. But then once again, his past bullshit that he was doing makes it so that he can't like it's not going to work out for him, because Phil, who is the one of the club managers, is the one that like secretly signs off for the money for the event, and he's setting him up because he doesn't like him due to some of the past stuff that he's done to him. So it's all of this stuff where he finally does kind of come up with a scheme that might have worked out, but because of his past, that's what actually ruins him. It all just catches up to him, I guess.
Yeah, there's definitely a sense of tragedy to it, is that, he's clearly pitched 30 of these schemes and they've all been bullshit.
Right.
And he finally has a scheme that actually has a little bit of merit to it. But there's no one who would believe him because, he's fucked over so many people in his time to do it. And also, once again, in order to set up this scheme, he has to kind of lie to people, and he has to, which again is not a solid foundation for the kind of business relationship that you're going to have with someone. So that
includes
the whole
ruining people too, like forging documents that later comes into play and things like that.
Yep.
So
he has no thought to the cost of the
long term.
By how something that gets him money in the short term, could actually ruin him or ruin other people in the long term. He has no thought towards it, which brings us to the scheme that he actually does set up in this is revolved around 1950s pro wrestling, which I think is a really hilarious kind of detail to it, because again there's something as Casey kind of mentioned that a lot of noir is it's kind of about PIs, or it's about detectives, or it's about gangsters in some ways. There's something so funny to me about how they try to make this kind of shoddy and low key in kind of a way. Like, it literally translates to the milieu of the film, where it's not nice hotels that he goes to. It's like seedy nightclubs. It's not a cool sport like at the time, like boxing. Like something like The Setup, I think, came out around this time, and that's like the boxing is the key to that. It's very there's a very sort of pageant-esque quality to the way that people would shoot boxing around this time. Instead, it's like this pissing contest over the minute arguments over wrestling form is the subject of this film, which I think is just like such a perfect translation of how again kind of minuscule this crime film is on its on the kind of level it's working on.
I like the differences between their kind of images and approaches too, because it almost feels like the I think his name is the Strangler, I guess, is more of like the city wrestler or whatever, and this Greek guy. He comes off as like a guy that would be in like he'd do the Rocky IV montage where he's like lifting logs in the woods, like that kind of thing. That's just the vibes he gives. But I like their two contrasts. That you have like, I guess the one guy looks almost more sleek looking, and then the Greek guy is just this massive bear of a man, and their fight is unbelievable.
In the scene where we meet them, where Harry is just at a wrestling match trying to pull more of his con, because most of his day-to-day sort of commission that he makes is by getting people to go to this Silver Fox Club, which is run by Phil and Helen, his wife. And I do like that scene in like the restaurant, for example, where he pays the cabbie for like a little bit of info on the guys he just dropped off. And he's like, yeah, so those guys are from Chicago and they're into like the fashion industry or whatever. And he immediately like pretends to be like a big friend of someone they know. Right. And, and he goes, are you guys going to like stay the whole night here? Like, this is like a piece of shit. And he says, I know a better place. You should go here. And he sends them to like the seedy nightclub. Like, that's how he makes his money. And he does this whole thing where like he drops a wallet, and he's like, is any of this wallet like your guys' wallet, as like a conversation starter? Either way, he's trying to pull that scheme at this wrestling match, and then he hears, during this big sort of, these guys are kind of like diving at themselves, and there's something about the wrestling that really pisses off this famous Greek wrestler who is in the crowd. He starts shouting pigs at them, and how it's all, shameless, tasteless exhibitionism. It's just for the show. It's not for the actual form. None of these people are actually wrestling. They're just, formlessly smacking each other and wearing shiny clothing. And it's very funny that, like, immediately Harry goes, yeah, do you know what? I really care about Greco-Roman traditions of the sport of wrestling.
Yes.
And the money signs in his eyes like light up instantly. And he makes sure that as Gregorius is leaving the venue, he's overheard demanding a refund for the exact same critiques that Gregorius had, which immediately like charms him towards him and flatters him.
And critically, he's only interested when he hears some other fans nearby go, hey, that's Gregorius. He used to be a big deal.
Yes. But Casey, you mentioned before we started recording that you had some knowledge about actual wrestling around this time. Is there something to this debate that they're having in this film?
So there is, and it specifically and very critically involves the actor playing Gregorius.
Oh, cool.
So the actor playing Gregorius, this is his only film role, but he was a real pro wrestler. His name was Stanislaus Zbyszko. Stanislaus Zbyszko was huge in the early 1900s up to the 1920s as a traditional Greco-Roman wrestler. In the twilight years of his career, wrestling starts moving. And now, to be fair, it has always been a carny industry that has had fixing scandals and stuff. But up to a certain point in the 20s, it was very much considered like a legitimate, fight performance, just like boxing. So Zbyszko was of the tradition of guys who were doing Greco-Roman and catch-as-catch-can style, where he was a legitimate fighter, and he would make people tap out and do these kind of things that were in a very old-school wrestling way. Around this time, though, and around the time he starts retiring in the 20s, there is another performer and his clique that start rising in prominence, and that performer's name was Ed the Strangler Lewis.
Shit, they literally named him after him here then.
It seems that way. And I was surprised because I went through all of the DVD extras. I went through every reading material I could find, and people have not really connected these two things, which, at least from what I could see. Ed the Strangler Lewis was a wrestler who I believe wrestled 6,000 matches, lost 32. Some which were real, some, and we'll get into how he kind of introduces more of the fixing angle that we know wrestling to be today.
Right.
He was also the popularizer of the sleeper hold, which is why he's called the Strangler. But Ed Lewis concocted a scheme in the 20s because he was so good that people were getting bored of seeing him. So he came up with a scheme, and he found this 6'6" football player that they called Big Wayne Munn. And Big Wayne Munn could not wrestle, but he had the look of a wrestler. He had the look, and in that time, if you were a wrestler, you could actually wrestle. If you got into a fight, you could put people in holds, you could do the moves, you were a shooter. But Big Wayne Munn was not. However, he was tall, he was muscular, he was attractive, and so in him, Ed Lewis kind of saw the future of wrestling. He wanted... So Lewis booked himself to get badly beaten up by Wayne Munn in front of a crowd who had never seen him manhandled that way before. But unlike the rest of them, Wayne Munn couldn't do any of the holds. He couldn't do anything. What he could do was the body slam. So Wayne Munn in the match, their big match, the first big match with Ed Lewis, he body slams him outside of the ring, which at the time was an illegal move. And Lewis sees dollar signs and he goes into full carny mode. So he pretends to be hospitalized. He's putting out lawsuits into the newspapers, and he is booking himself to be all right, me and this Wayne Munn guy are going to have a massive rematch. Nobody in the world knows that this guy can't actually wrestle because he looks like a wrestler, but I know. So he starts sending him on this tour. And he gets all the other bookers in town in on this idea that yeah, I know this guy is garbage, but look at him, so everybody kind of just agrees to take falls for the guy, all these legitimate wrestlers. At one point, Stanislaus Zbyszko, who again is nearing the end of his career, he does one dive for him, but at some point before this huge rematch, which at the time was going to be one of the biggest money making matches of all, of all time up to that point, the story goes one of two ways. Either a rival booker got to Zbyszko and offered him more money to do this, or, and I believe this given how much this comes up in both this movie and in like Zbyszko's conversations about these kind of things, it was Zbyszko's pride. But right before the big rematch that was supposed to be a huge moneymaker for the Strangler and for Wayne Munn, they have him Wayne Munn wrestle Zbyszko one more time. And rather than doing what he's told, Zbyszko turns to Munn in front of the crowd and says, "This time we wrestle for real," and demolishes Wayne Munn in an embarrassing fashion and exposes the scam to the public. So,
wow.
Everything kind of blows up in the Strangler's face. Like it's just like the scheme is exposed, and like there start to be the conversations of like, whoa, is this all fake? Like it starts as early as there and still, has decades to percolate until it becomes what we know what it is now. But I feel, especially in Zbyszko's performance, that there is that argument he's having that like because the other problem for Zbyszko was, as time went on, his Greco-Roman style really wasn't as popular as this like ridiculous form where people are throwing each other out of the ring and doing body slams and things that aren't
throwing
traditional.
him off the Hell in the Cell.
Exactly, yeah. Well, and I mean, of course, hilariously, if you follow wrestling today, like every generation... Yeah. And also, every generation is still having this argument that the new generation is killing the business and it won't be around anymore.
Right.
Like, it's never gone away. It's always been this. But I think that Dassin in interviews said that the reason he casts Stanislav Zbyszko as Gregorius is because he remembered an image of him on a poster from the 20s when he was a kid. And he was like, oh, well, I remember this guy being a champion. Let's find him. And he was told he was dead, but instead he finds out that he's this chicken farmer out in New Jersey that's just been quietly living into his 50s. And he said, oh, he was this beautiful man that spoke 12 languages, and he was so interested in everything. And like Dassin would invite the crews to go see experimental theater after the show. And the only person that ever took him up on it was Zbyszko. He would go to all these like arts and things with him. So I truly believe at some point in this process, Zbyszko like got to him and was able to tell him all these stories of his life. And so I think that Dassin shows Gregorius with this real respect and reverence as being like man of integrity and spirituality that I don't necessarily think would have come through if it wasn't Stanislav Zbyszko. Like it's...
Yeah. Well, and that's what's so interesting, I think, ultimately, is that like this is a case where Harry has found like the real deal. He's found a guy who actually does have some kind of integrity. He has some knowledge about the thing that he's upset about. And Harry's plan is just, what if I give this guy money and back him to start his own wrestling, organization and to compete with the other one? And also the genius of it is that he's safe to do that because the guy who is running the really shitty, sort of shameless exhibitionist version of wrestling that Gregorius is upset with is Gregorius' son. Yeah. So Harry has found like the perfect maneuver. He's like, I can start a competitive wrestling organization with this guy because this guy, he actually knows his shit. He actually would train all the fighters. He could run it. I don't need to actually have any skill or knowledge in any of this. I just need to, find the money to front it.
And any time that they question me, I can just prop his dad in front of him and be like, no, look, he's going to protect me. Like those scenes where the father starts to just stand up for Harry and Harry uses it as like a shield, essentially.
And also Gregorius like very clearly believes that he's that he's a man who just believes
of his word.
Truly.
Yes.
Yeah. And he's just like, you don't know this guy like I do.
Yes. Misguided, but he is the only one that believes in Harry in this entire movie.
Yeah, no, but I do think that context is really important because, Gregorius, he really does have something in this whole, I'm going to return wrestling to, what it actually is. And we're going to put on like, a real fight that people are going to watch. It's not going to be this dude who just puts on a shiny costume and just fakes it the entire time for the spectacle of it. We're going to put on like, sort of real wrestling, and Harry sees that as an opportunity for investment. But the issue also is he can't find anyone to give him money to actually invest in it. He needs to have 400 quid to start this business up. He goes to Phil, the guy who he works on commission to send people to his club, and Phil literally maniacally laughs in his face for like 5 minutes, which I thought was a hilarious scene. He literally can't stop laughing to say no because it's the idea to him is so funny that he would back him on one of his schemes. Yeah.
And something I think is remarkable about that scene, you're right, it's very funny to watch Phil Narcissus laugh, but also like, it's so interesting as kind of a metronome to that scene that we see Phil's wife, Mrs. Narcissus, go from like telling Widmark to get out to like suddenly seeing her own position in the scheme while he's still too busy laughing to notice what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah, because Helen, it's worth noting, her relationship with Phil is that, they are married, but basically only
like
in the image of being married. Yes, exactly.
He wants it to be more.
Yeah, and clearly something has like gone wrong between them. He's kind of abusive towards her because she won't, actually, be, in love with him in the way that he wants her to be and everything like this. And she very clearly has worked her way up from, she used to be in sort of Mary's position where she was someone who just worked the club. And so I do like that this film really kind of gives you so many different agendas that people have, and it kind of deals in the dramatic irony of we the audience kind of see these agendas, but the other characters aren't completely aware of them. Like Phil does a lot of his own plotting. There's sort of like the strangler obvious. Yes,
Phil has
Helen
a lot of scenes where it kind of
plotting.
ends where he's just like, it does a little scowl and like the darkness, the shadow goes over his face. Yeah, it's great. He's just looming in the background while he's listening to Helen or something. It's pretty good.
Yeah, I love the part where because Helen, while he's maniacally laughing, gives Harry an out. That he doesn't realize by saying that, he won't give you the 400 quid, but if you bring us 200 quid, he'll match you, that kind of thing. And Harry is immediately very upset and flustered by that because he can't find it. And, we mentioned earlier the montage of him going to the forgers and going to the panhandlers and being like, please, someone front me just 200. I only need 200.
And they've all fronted him before, like everyone.
Yeah. And they're all like, no fucking way. And I do love the way that, again, he's always grinning and, putting on a big sort of show for those people. And then when he runs into Helen, he's like, he's like so upset with her. He's so cold to her and like calling her like terrible names. And he's like, how dare you sell me down the river on like this particular plan? I just needed the 200 quid. And Helen is, despite being called every name in the book, is the one to give him the 200 quid, which she gets by selling a fur coat that Phil tried to give to her, which is very upsetting to him and very important. But I love how Harry immediately flips. He's like, Helen, you're a dame and you won't regret this. Immediately he's just like, Helen, you're the best. I'm sorry. I absolutely hated your guts and wanted to stomp on you like literally 30 seconds ago.
Also, I love the scene immediately after, where as soon as that 200 shows up, Phil immediately checks the closet to see that the coat is gone and goes, okay. Yes. Like he's already on to the scheme because there's no way he could have done it that fast.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was getting at, because I think Jamie was mentioning that Phil is like kind of very obvious in some of his planning, but it's so funny watching him in the same room as Harry is handing him the 200 quid and forcing him to, on the deal that he agreed to match him. And Phil like already knows that, Helen has betrayed him and given him the money and done all of this. And also there's a bit where there is word of this Fabian Promotions underway, a new wrestling company getting started. And Crisco, who is the son of Gregorius and, the businessman who's running, basically controlling all of London's wrestling, he sends out a couple of men after him. And it's Phil, I think, who answers the door. And they're just like, yeah, if Harry starts up, anything like this, like we're, they don't say it, but they're very threatening. They're very like, we're going to fucking take him down. I hope you know that.
Yeah.
And they hand him his business card and everything. And Phil is like, yeah, don't worry. He's not starting up that business. Like he was a pro such and such last week. Next week he'll be something else. His schemes are changing. But Phil, that gesture of him ripping up that business card while handing Harry the money to match the deal is so ominous, because he's basically like, I'm letting him start up his pro wrestling company, even though I have the knowledge that if he does, these guys are probably going to break his legs or something.
Yeah, and it leads to, like, there's never a moment where you can kind of feel a sense of relief. Like, even when you're watching him feel a little happier that his scheme is kind of on the up and up, that Phil's in the background just going to ruin it in 30 minutes. So there's like never it's just so tense the entire time because of that, because they let you in on some of the things that maybe another movie wouldn't necessarily.
Yeah, there's so much detail to the kind of warring parties, and also sadness to it on the periphery as well, because like that scene coincides with him also abandoning Mary at work, and her talking herself into all the different excuses for why Harry would like forget about her, even though she's like sitting there. The only other person there is Phil, we also know to be incredibly lonely.
Well, that scene, by the way, has such beautiful framing, because there's Phil confined in like the sharp windows of his office that are countercrossing, and then there's Mary on the other side of the screen that is just alone on this completely empty dance floor. Just a beautifully shot thing that gives you exactly where their positions in the story are in relation to the people they want to be there for them.
But yeah, both of them are being sort of schemed around by people who, couldn't, actually care less about them as people. And it's very, crazy to have Mary sort of empathize with Phil, because we also know Phil to be, have his own sort of nefarious agenda as well, which gets into some really dark places. And some really fatalistic places as well.
Yes.
Now that Fabian has his money, though, I love that the very first thing he does is blow it on a huge sign.
Yes, Fabian Promotions, a huge sign.
And in the middle of the scene, he's delivered a package that just has a huge plaque that is being carried on the back of like the mythological figure of Atlas for some reason. Like,
yes,
he is so enamored with just the decorations of the position again, instead of like the actual operation of the day-to-day.
Yeah, because it's the surface of legitimacy. It's like, I am successful. This business has my name on it. Phil, for some reason, said make him a silent partner very ominously. I don't know why he said to do that, but I'm happy to have my name on the business completely solo. I love the part where he lovingly is stroking his managing director like desk title piece that he got. But yeah, Christo comes in and like threatens him now that he's starting up this own, his own club. But he immediately, very cynically, weaponizes his dad right in front of him. He's like, I'm not the only one starting this company. Look who else is here. And he's like, it really, describes his relationships with people that like, he just, he doesn't really talk to Gregorius actually running the place. It's just when he's just like, yeah, Gregorius I need him to counter his son's goons. So what if I drag him by the arms and I'm like, look, I'm starting up a business with this guy. And the son is being like, he will swindle you. He will cheat you. He will break your heart is what the son is like saying to him, which we know we know to be true. We know that he's only cynically invested in all of this.
And we know it instantly, because the very first scheme Fabian has, now that he has this promotion, is to immediately turn to the Stranglers manager and go, yeah, we should put your guy who Gregorius despises more than anyone else in wrestling, up against his young protege who he's trying to teach the legitimate Greco-Roman arts of wrestling.
Yes. And which is like such a betrayal of everything that he has claimed to, Gregorius to be someone to be what he supports. He's like, no, I'll betray it in a heartbeat if it means that I will actually have this thing. I will take all the integrity out of this thing. Which is, it's a very brutal realization, especially, and also, again, he's very skilled at what he does. So there's something very interesting about how he's able to pull that off. Because there's this whole aspect to it where he needs to get the Strangler really upset. And I love the way that we kind of follow him. So there's him at the bar with the manager of the Strangler. And then he leads him over to the table and he just says, like, follow my lead. He's like, we're going to do something crazy. He's like, I know Gregorius would never agree to fight the Strangler. We're going to make this happen. And he just starts talking open shit about the Strangler at the table, like right beside him. And as soon as he stands up and gets angry, he's like, oh, was the Strangler there the entire time? I didn't even see him. Anyway, Gregorius thinks that you're a piece of shit and that
he's
he
at
could
the
kick
gym
your ass.
right now.
Yeah.
Just so
and
happens.
so the Strangler runs there in a heat and starts a fight. And, so between Gregorius and the Strangler all yelling at each other about who has the better, wrestling form and, all of this, Harry goes, Gregorius, don't you kind of want to fight him to prove him wrong, right? And, what if we sold a show where you did that? And so watching him just very openly manipulate this very sweet, honest man into doing the thing that, breaks his integrity, but convincing him that he wants to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Out of anger and out of kind of showmanship and everything like that. And that is really where Harry lives. And like, that's, he's very skilled at getting people to kind of believe that the thing he wants them to do is what they actually want to do.
Yeah.
But in order to do that, he's destroying people. He's destroying himself in ways. I love the line that the son gets when he first, tells him that, where this is going to lead and that Harry is going to betray him. He says, you're very sharp, Mr. Fabian. You've done a very sharp thing, maybe even sharp enough to cut your throat, which is like just a very good piece of like noir pulp writing, obviously, but also it speaks to exactly what it is that he's doing. He's acting very clever. He's performing these very sharp actions that are achieving the goals that he wants. But he's at the same time he's setting fucking time bombs everywhere he goes while he does it.
Yep. And then it leads into one of the like best physical fights that I've seen in this context.
Yeah, we should talk about that.
It's so long. Like I couldn't believe how just it just kept going, and there's like an insane amount of wrestling variations and moves, and the camera really locks on. They don't do a lot of cutaways, so it really feels like these guys are actually fighting. And to be honest, since they were both experienced, I wouldn't be surprised if a take here and there they were actually hitting each other and really doing those slams. So it's great.
I did want to give a quick shout out to the other wrestler playing the Strangler. That's Mike Mazurki. He was also a pro wrestler, fairly still active at this point as a wrestler while he was filming this movie. He gained a lot of Hollywood experience as well. He was a villain in the original Dick Tracy as Splitface. Right. He was also a gangster in Some Like It Hot. He's got a lot of roles around this time, but he was himself a pro wrestler, and he did choreograph the wrestling in this scene.
Oh, awesome.
And I really enjoy this too, because as you said, like it is such an intense battle, and it's a real contrast of styles, because they really emphasize that, because Gregorius is still doing these traditional moves. Like he's going for the bear hug, he's going for holds, and the Strangler is like kidney punching, and like he is just being like a brute. He's doing the kind of brawling that people who go to that more circus style want to see, but like he legitimately looks like he's out to kill someone.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and I like too that, you know, again, it's these two very sweaty giant men just like pounding each other like meat sacks, just like breathlessly throwing each other. There's no music to it. It's really just all the beating and grappling. It's very ugly and brutal.
And critically, it does not happen in front of an audience. Like, it is at the contract signing in an empty gym.
Very personal.
Yeah, he has set up Fabian has set up this house of cards, and it's collapsing before there's anywhere to profit from it.
Right.
Yeah, which is really like brutal kind of experience, especially from all the things that we've seen him do to like set this up, right? Like he's like, I've got the perfect scheme. I've got this pro wrestler. I've got his son, who is the one person who could financially like threaten me. Can't touch him because he would also be hurting his own father. You know, he's got all of these things really properly set up. Phil, though, I think is at the last minute is the one who kind of betrays him and says that he's not giving him the 200 quid to actually put on, even though he's got everything set up. He says, instead of giving you the sharp edge of the knife.
God,
that's exactly what a line. And he also says, you know, you can't put, you know, I think he says like, you've got it all. Like you've got a sure ticket to success here. I believe you, but you can't put that fight on because you don't have the money, and no man in London will give you a shilling.
You have everything, but you're a dead man.
Yeah. A dead man, Harry Fabian. That's so good. And meanwhile, like he smashes like the symbol as he like runs out into the night and gets almost hit by a car, which is when he, you know, which is really scary idea, obviously, that he's played all of his cards right and he's like an inch away from the finish line, but none of it matters because his methods to get there have made him the enemy of these very dangerous people. And he's sealed his own death certificate by just upsetting Phil. And then he tries to like fool Mary by calling her to get out of her flat so he can steal from her. And that's such a heartbreaking moment when, you know, she finds out.
He just like rummages through and basically ignores her, pushes her to the side. Like he shoves
her and breaks her heart. It's literally, we're watching the opening scene again, but this time, you know,
he's not even trying.
He's literally stealing from her. He's not actually, you know, having any kind of conversation about it. And, you know,
and it's frantic too. Like he's not even doing a scheming thing. He's just in a frantic desperation now. And also,
it's the very opposite of his sensational maneuvering that we were seeing earlier. He's literally just shoving this woman and literally stealing out of her bag.
And that desperation comes from the fact that that the wrestler dies after that fight, the older man. And they have that moment with Crisco. Is that his name, Crisco? Or is it Cristo?
Yeah, well, I actually think he steals the money before that because he was stealing the money to actually put it on.
To get the contract
to put on
signed
the show.
Yeah, you're probably right.
To get the contract signed. But then, you know, it turns out that he stole that shit for nothing because he runs there. He runs there with the money that he just abused like the only person who actually cares about him to get. And by the time he gets there, and what's so funny too is that he's caused this because the only reason these two are fighting at all is because they fucking hate each other because he set that up. He made that happen.
He has wound them up and kept them in a room together where Strangler is drinking, and Gregorius has this pure contempt for that style of wrestling and like what he sees as the degradation of his art. But he has put them there and kept them there for long enough for it to boil over.
He literally stoked the personal feud for his own business reasons, and then that personal feud that he stoked actually ends up destroying the business before it even has a chance to get started. They literally, Gregorius like beats him, but in order to beat him, he basically, you know, exhausts himself so much that he dies. He's an old man. But he dies having won his match, which to him,
he dies a prideful death in his eyes. At the very least.
Yeah, but the bit where the son sits him down in the chair and he says it's cold, can you close the window? And the window is like fully clothed and and stuff like that.
And he fakes closing it, like just to give his dad a kind of visual of like he's not delirious and dying right now. I do. It's sad, of course, but I do like that one of his last lines, I believe, is "I had a good life." to his son. And
Yeah.
it's just crazy too, because we're watching like I guess he's a wrestling promoter, but he's also essentially like a gangster. So watching this like sad moment between the gangster and an old wrestling father was not what I expected from this movie, but it was really good. I like that. And then that's kind of Crisco's motivation
that's like,
to get the entire fucking city after him. So
yeah, well, because it's so funny that like that is more of an emotional relationship than Harry probably actually has.
Yes,
and like that's such a cutting observation by the film that like there's something so real between this this guy and his father, who he just weaponized and killed, and he flees immediately because the father was not just his business, but it was his protection guarantee. So Christo is like, I don't know, we're starting a fucking manhunt like right now, and every hustler,
even
in
the
city.
Strangler gets up and participates in the manhunt, having been the guy who Gregorius died fighting, because he realizes, if I'm the one that kills him, if I'm the one that kills Fabian, no one is going to blame me. They won't say I did anything wrong to Gregorius. It's this guy now, and I'm going to prove it.
Yeah, and I love too the way immediately like every hustler in the city sees the dollar signs to betray the man that they just they find casually annoying,
right?
Throughout the rest of the film, because he has no friends. He has no real friends.
Yeah, and you can't help but feel like Harry would have done the exact same given any, like if just a random other person was going through his scenario, you know that he'd take the $1,000 to rat the guy.
He would have done it for less.
Yeah, exactly. Would have done it for $200.
And the way that message from Christo is carried into the streets in that long shot behind the dude's head driving around London is so sick.
It's so cool.
Yeah. Like that's the great use of like the actual sort of like, London location shooting that they do. Like there's lots of great clubs and bars and streets and restaurants. And, he really tried to get onto the level where Swindler would really live. And you would see the places that he would interact with, which is like especially true of when Fabian, basically like the third man style, finds himself surrounded and betrayed by like the gutter that he so skillfully navigated. Like he's running through these rundown buildings and these broken stones, and he's still trying to play the cops and the crooks like equally. And everyone is, out and looking for him. But all of those places that he previously saw as like his place of business or his place of work, the place he was skilled at, now he's watching it literally like close in around him. Like that big finale we talked about when we did The Third Man last year, where he has to literally go into the subterranean part of it, the underworld that he helped kind of create in a way.
Yeah,
he's even running a bit like he does in the beginning, but this time the stakes are too high. It's not a thing people are just going to shrug off. You have crossed the wrong person finally, and now you can't just comfortably go to the next thing. It's never going to be better.
Yeah, and at least like before it was, a couple people after you. Now you have the entire district just trying to kill you, every single person you see around the corner. I also love that one moment he gets where he's like cornered between a couple guys and a couple people in a car, and then a cop comes up and he starts to try to be like, oh, these gentlemen need directions, and distracts them and gets away. So I do like they also incorporate some of his intelligence in the escape a little bit as well, even though it doesn't end up working out very well.
I also love that scene where he visits his panhandler friend and stays in his house for a little while, and just reading the body language of the panhandler guy, he realizes, oh, you're in for the money too. Like it plays out so tensely and so. And the panhandler guy almost looks like a L.A. Noire character, if you remember the Rockstar game. Like, his face goes through the whole range of expressions as he tries to lie. It's fantastic.
Yeah,
doubting you.
So he's running all through the sort of back streets of London as everything's sort of collapsing around him, not just his business, but his entire life. And Helen is also trying to leave Phil at this point in the film, but Phil is like, there's no future with Fabian. Like I've set it up, but not realizing that Helen was not leaving him to be with Harry, which is why Phil has sort of like, helped his downfall. Yeah. He thought that it was like a sort of like a romantic relationship that they had, but Helen actually just wanted to leave Phil and start her own club. But in order to do that, she needed a license. And so Harry helped get her a license, but Harry paid a forger to forge the license rather than getting her like an actual one. And that's so brutal when she finally opens her club and she's like, I've escaped the clutches of Phil.
Yep.
And then she puts like a glass down on the license and it just immediately like the ink starts bleeding off of it. And they go, this is not right. Like this is, he basically ruined her life, and her leaving Phil causes Phil to kill himself.
Yeah. And then she goes back to Phil in desperation in order to find the body. And it's just like, oh my God, what a clusterfuck that Harry's made here.
Yeah, and Phil didn't leave the club to her. Phil left it to like Molly, like the crazy old woman who helped run
hammered.
the place. Yeah. So like Harry has like basically,
screwed everything.
I wouldn't go as far as to say Phil was like this really great dude or anything, but Phil at the very least was someone who employed him.
Yes.
And Helen was someone who didn't deserve what she got. And it's very bleak that, in his wake, he's just like, you have Phil who's committed suicide and Helen who is just like completely financially ruined, even though the only thing that and legally ruined, even though all she was looking for was like autonomy away from Phil. And yeah, he just basically screwed them all. And he's having flashbacks to the conversations that he's had where, Phil is, said that he was a dead man, and Mary said, you're killing me and you're killing yourself. And he's, experiencing the weight of all of the things that have brought him here, and, noticing, realizing, I think, that, he is, primarily the cause of what has happened to him, even though, he did get close. He was one contract signing away where the two wrestlers didn't kill each other before showtime.
Yeah, so close. Yeah, because at that one point he gets to that just like that boat dock eventually. And he's done with running. Like he's just, I think he even has a line where he's just like, I just need a place to sit down because I am absolutely fucking exhausted.
Yeah, Mary said it at the beginning. He can't run forever.
Yeah. And I love too that, cause it leads into the final shot of the film. But when he goes into that boathouse and the old lady like lights a cigarette and they smoke together or whatever. There's this great shot of inside the boat and you can see the bridge just in the background. And I just like how, and we'll get to it, but how it leads kind of to the connection of the very last shot of the film, which is just very dark and ominous.
It's also very similar to the boat that Widmark lives in on Pickup on South Street.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you're
true.
right.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah, no, that stuff's great. And this finale where he's just, he's finally stopped running to take a rest for one moment. You just get these close-ups on his bruised, sweaty face as he's kind of realized what he's done. The expression of terror and doom as these quiet footsteps start approaching, and he realizes, that everything has fallen apart and he was so close. And, he had Mary, this woman who actually loved him, but, the things that he did to her. And Mary even still finds him and tries to help him get out of town by giving him money and saying, you need to, get out of here. And
yeah, what a sad, I would say like character moment for him too, because he basically says like, well, just let them know where I am and then you can take the money and live a better life. Yeah. And it's just so sad because even at this point when Mary's like, leave because I care about you, not because I want money, not because of anything, but because I care about you. He's still like, yeah, but wouldn't you like that $1,000? Like, isn't that important? She's like, no, you fucking idiot. I want you to live on. And it's just like, it's so frustrating that even at the end, he really doesn't have like a clear moment in that regard.
He can't see anything except in those terms that he has set for himself. Like,
right.
Yeah.
She has offered him, yes, once again, I am offering you the comfort of a better life. Let's just run off and be honest. No. He can't do that. He can't do it. And I love that really brutal line he says to her, which is, don't be kind to me.
Yeah. Like, I really don't deserve it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, he almost wants her to be as ruthless as him,
right?
So that he can't, like, you know, that he doesn't feel as bad about it. He doesn't want her to, you know, actually be kind and to actually be honest. And, you know, she's just like, no, you need to be a ruthless hustler like me too, so that this has, you know, have been of some value to anyone. Weaponizing his own death as a con to make her money. And he's like, this is my true foolproof idea.
Yeah. And he doesn't even let her have it. Like, he still insists because he runs out, starts screaming like, oh, you're the rat, you did this to me, whatever, just to make
you
it seem
Judas
like she actually did. It's like he just to the bitter end. He never understood.
He dies with one last performance.
Truly. Yeah.
That Mary betrayed him so that she'll hopefully get paid, and then he runs straight into the Strangler's grip, right into the shot of him running like into the camera and the hand just appearing from like underneath the lens and going right into his neck, and then tossing his body in the river as Christo watches.
So cold.
And that shot where you can see the toss in the foreground, and then Christo is in the background on the bridge watching it, like having just like made that happen.
And then he just throws his cigarette into the water, right where you would assume his body is floating. Like just the added disrespect. Yeah, it's what an ending. Very bleak.
And I wanted to bring up, because we've mentioned all these scenes, one of the beautiful things about that third act is that for almost everybody but Mary, there is a moment in each of their faces where it seems to them like things are coming together and then it all falls apart. When Widmark comes to get the money from Phil for the last time, there is this really fantastic bit of physical acting from Widmark where he leaps over the banister staircase and like lands and like sort of jaunts in, and then like seconds later realizes he's not getting the money, and you see the bar kind of close in around him. There's that bit where Gregorius thinks he has won the match and he has his pride, but then he dies. Phil, when he realizes that Fabian is dying, has this like moment of triumph and smirking because he thinks like, okay, well, now that my wife can't go with him.
He lights up that cigar and he's like, nice, I've done it.
And then realizes she's leaving anyway. With Helen, she's running her bar. She would have gotten away with the counterfeit scheme if she didn't have that moment of boasting where the cop that was leaving anyway, she invites him to have the drink that smears the ink. And even the Strangler in the end, who thinks that he is murdering Fabian to get away with murder, ends up being arrested anyway in plain view of the cops. Everyone thinks they're getting what they want and no one gets anything.
Yeah, it's so honestly like it's such a brutally like nihilistic depiction of, you know, this very desperate and destructive wave of just like self-interest. You know, self-interest above all else. People tricking each other into getting a leg up on others at the cost of, you know, whatever, you know, without even realizing, you know, what it is. And it's not just Widmark, which is what's interesting, because you know Widmark, you know, in playing Harry, he's very sweaty and unhinged and grinning like a freak, and he's in a constant state of spinning plates and panic decision making. But like again, he's not the only, you know, person who has an agenda. Everyone here is trying to survive, which is kind of what reminded me a little bit of Pick Up on South Street.
Yeah,
where it's like, you know, everyone kind of has a scheme going. Some people are just operating on different levels.
And the only one that's not expecting anything of him is the woman that he can't settle down with.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Really, really bleak stuff. But we should pivot towards reductive rating right here on Night in the City, which for me is a very, very high 4.
Yeah.
This is... absolute. I mean, you know, the noir is a type of film that is known for this specifically, but even despite being known for it, this is one of the sweatiest, most desperate and like panicked noirs I've ever seen. That's like very, very depressing. This is a movie that opens with a man frantically evading debt and ends with his corpse being tossed in the river, having caused the death of a nice old man. The death of a nightclub owner who gave him work when he needed it, the financial ruin of an abused woman who was just as desperate for escape as he was, and the complete emotional turmoil of like the only person who actually cared about him. It's brutal, and I think it is like a near perfect depiction of a kind of cinema that I really appreciate, which I'm going to dub scumbag failure cinema.
Like it,
because he just everything that he tries to do goes completely wrong, and he's not cool or handsome like other noir heroes are. He's really just this Weasley loser. Who destroys everything around him. And it's crazy that on some level too, you still, you empathize with a lot of these characters and what they've done to put themselves here. And I think that this is really, really amazing. And I just really need to check out more of Jules Dassin. I think.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, I'm going to give it a high 4 as well. I mean, I love the kind of, he's kind of charismatic and confident in the beginning, and then as it goes, the desperation and frantic qualities of his character just come out more and more until he's literally tossed into a river, lifeless. So it's this movie is nonstop. Like the pacing is truly unbelievable. There's never really a scene when he's not scheming or somebody else is secretly scheming in the background to go against Harry, and it's endlessly entertaining. And as I think the ending is quite justified. It seems as if these characters are very doomed, especially as the film goes on. It just seems as if all the self-interest really just leads them to their demise at the end of the day. So it's something that feels very constricting as the film goes. It's just it had that same quality as what was the one The Long Good Friday, where I didn't realize it as much with that one, but by the end, it just felt like it was inevitable to be as doomed as it is. So yeah, this was great. High 4 out of 5. I'm looking forward to revisiting this one.
Hell yeah, for you, Casey.
I agree. High 4. Yeah, it's a fascinating movie. Widmark gives a performance for the ages. I really, really love the attention to detail as far as shooting the London city streets, especially toward the end, where we see a lot of these sort of post-World War II buildings that still have bomb damage. It's beautifully shot, incredibly tense throughout. The energy is frantic. And I just want to give kudos to a movie from the 1950s recognizing what all wrestling fans know, which is that the most fascinating characters in wrestling are often the scumbag managers and bookers behind the scenes.
That's right.
Fantastic movie, fantastic noir, and one of the best wrestling films that's ever going to be made.
Yeah, the fact that this is about wrestling, I feel like should not be understated. Like, it's so crazy that there is we're watching something that has, all of the fatalism and brutality of something like the Maltese Falcon, but like it's literally about a guy just trying to scheme a small time wrestling organization.
Yeah, like how many
that's such that.
And how many noirs have a full-fledged, just sweaty, really well-shot wrestling match? Like, it's just like something you never see.
Like that in there.
Yeah, it was unreal.
Who needs a gunfight? Just put two giant men slapping each other around.
All of the best wrestlers are con artists.
Yes. Oh, and as we're ending it up here, one last line that I wrote down in the quotes that I forgot to mention. You had brain, ambition. You worked harder than any other man, but the wrong things, always the wrong things. Which I think is definitely sums up the feeling you get to by the end of the film. You're like, God damn.
Yep, 100%.
Really that'll wrap it up for Night in the City. We're going to be right back, and we're going to be talking about the sweet smell of success.
I can explain.
It's why you put your hands on my sister.
JJ! I didn't do anything! Stop!
All right, we are back, and we are talking Sweet Smell of Success, the 1957 American film noir drama film directed by one Alexander McKendrick and starring, quite famously, Burt Lancaster and Tony Curtis as J.J. Hunsaker and Sidney Falco, a New York City newspaper writer who is very unscrupulous with his ethics and holds considerable sway over kind of public opinion, I guess you would say, in his column that he writes. Watching this, it always makes me go back and wonder, at a time when individual writers had that much power.
I know.
I think people are a lot more skeptical of writing now and blogging and things of this nature. So it's very funny going back and watching, like a Broadway columnist being treated like a fucking rock star, like he is in this movie.
Yeah.
And
this is a very famous noir. For very very obvious reasons. This is like one of the most popular, one of the most highest rated, even though it wasn't at its time, which I'm sure most of you are probably familiar with on this show. I feel like I say that every single time.
It's also true of almost all of the noir classics.
Box office bomb. Audiences didn't like it. But it has since become like one of the most acclaimed and well known of its genre.
A lot of these darker ones didn't get popular until they kind of did like that. I guess people looked back on them in like more of the 70s, I think it was, and people started to respect what they were doing a little more. Is that true?
and the 60s too, when especially when film criticism kind of took a bit of a turn there with the French.
Okay.
with the Truffauts and everyone who were kind of like, they were reclaiming old Hollywood film, people who were doing workman-like film, but, deserved credit for the amount of craft they were putting in. So they were doing it with Westerns as well. But yeah, absolutely. They were looking back at some noirs that maybe didn't have the best reputation, but should have for obvious reasons. And also too, with this film, actually, it's worth noting, it actually was pretty critically successful.
Oh, okay.
even when it came out, it didn't do too well with audiences because it had a very famous. I think it's very well known now, that this is a very talky, very grim film that's appreciated now, but it had a very famous preview screening that just tanked. That they could feel the audience recoiling at how ugly it was. And so many people were there because they were fans of Tony Curtis or Burt Lancaster. And they were just unable to get into...
Which I find funny. Like, it's like you kind of should recoil at these horrible characters, but I guess that's the point.
Well, they were just unable to get into how awful these these artists that they idolize, awful their characters are.
Because this would have been at like the height of Tony Curtis being a teen heartthrob.
Right.
So, yes.
And he did it because he wanted to kind of destroy that image a little bit, right? He wanted to be
he got exactly what he wanted.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's like a really interesting kind of aspect to this, that this is a very writerly, very actorly kind of film, and one that I find works really well with people broadly. Like if you show someone a noir and you kind of want to give them an idea of what the genre is, this is a pretty good place to start for people. And it's very funny just that at the time people were like, oh my god, no, Tony Curtis, no, he's a beautiful romantic man. He cannot be this slimy little piece of shit that he plays in this film.
Burt Lancaster couldn't possibly be as cold or angry as he's depicted as here, which by all accounts of the backstage of this movie, that's exactly who he was. But
yeah, I heard that they had him use his actual glasses because they said that it made him look like a really tough and kind of aggressive like librarian or professor or something like that.
Yeah.
And he definitely does. He's very, very mean.
Well, and he's got such a physically imposing presence too. Like when he stands next to their characters, like there is like this sort of sinister power about him.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Well, and they wanted someone like that. They originally wanted Orson Welles.
Oh yeah.
I can imagine Orson like thriving on the dialogue and on the parts where like you are this like social center of attention, because he commands that. But but I don't think he could hit the coldness like Lancaster
Yeah,
can.
I could see that.
Yeah, I do like what Lancaster especially ultimately, did with it. The way that he delivers his lines, this very spare kind of brutishness to them, and he definitely comes off like a man who thinks so highly of himself that no one around him is even worth like a second glance. Yeah. And it's worth noting that this is very true to, as Casey mentioned, this is very true to what Lancaster was like. People say on set that even on previous films, he was partially cast because. The history of people working with him was that, he was very intimidating and very volatile. And so they were specifically like, yeah, let's get this guy, we're looking for an intimidating, volatile artist. Who should we get?
and it should be noted, Lancaster was one of the producers, so he saw this in himself.
Yeah.
Yep.
He's like, oh, I can be that asshole. Definitely.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and part of why that test screening was so notorious too, the one that I was mentioning before, is that Burt Lancaster tried to beat up McKendrick at it. He blamed him for how well or how poorly it was doing with audiences.
Oh my god, that's so funny.
But then admitted several years later that it was actually a good movie. It just didn't make the money he hoped it would.
Right.
No, it was a bomb. They lost like millions of dollars on the film, and it basically tanked this dude's career. If you're wondering why, Alexander McKendrick, who you look at his filmography and you're like, wow, he made one of the most famous noirs ever, and then like The Lady Killers.
Right.
And like that's basically it. And part of what happened there was that this movie bombed so hard, and he didn't get much of a chance to work again. I believe he went into teaching film.
Okay.
So yeah, kind of unfortunate that he gotten so much industry shit for making just a really good movie.
Well, what a person to learn from, right?
Yes, that's true. But yeah, for I'm assuming most people are familiar with Sweet Smell of Success, but for anyone who isn't, it's based on the Ernest, is it Lehman?
Yes.
Novelette? Sweet Smell of Success, originally titled in its cosmopolitan debut, Tell Me About It Tomorrow. I do like this title better.
I do like that.
Yeah, the only reason they made him change it was because they didn't like the word smell. They were like, we don't like, it's smelly. That's not we don't want our readers thinking about that word, even though that is the perfect word to be thinking about watching this movie. This is like a very pungent film.
Yes.
But this film is based on Ernest Lehman's real experiences working as an assistant under the New York press agent and columnist for The Hollywood Reporter. He is the New York press agent, and he was working for a columnist, Irvin Hoffman. Is that correct?
Yes.
Maybe I'm getting these details mixed up.
Oh, you've got to go.
But yeah, essentially he came into this film, writing this film, and he was like, he just really wanted to show the sliminess of what people considered sort of like the crime underworld or the streets, the kind of thing we were just talking about in Night in the City, the way, this world of forgers and hustlers and, things of that nature, that it is actually just as present in the world of journalism and politics. And, despite the appearances that these people in these places might put on.
Critically, this is also a real stab at a very famous columnist of the time, Walter Winchell. Winchell was an extremely influential gossip rag guy who very much could destroy very famous people very easily just by printing dirt about them. And he was constantly surrounded by press agents who were desperate to get his attention and desperate to get their stories into his column. He held court at a restaurant called, I forget which club, I believe it may be the Swan Club in New York or something, but he had a table right by the VIP lounge that everyone had to approach him at, and he would destroy you with like withering comments if he didn't want to see you. But he was...
Which is incredible because it's exactly what we see in this film.
Oh my God.
It is, and importantly... in the final years of Winchell's popularity, he aligned himself with McCarthy and HUAC, and because he was really upset at a lot of like the liberal and lefty celebrities who never gave him the time of day. So he would target them. And one of the targets of his ire on point was Burt Lancaster, which I think is why Lancaster is so attracted to this film.
Yeah, I mean, that would make a lot of sense.
Oh, man.
Goddamn. Yeah, I speaking of what you were just talking about, one of my favorite aspects of this film is the kind of power that they give to this, this writer who, who unlike a lot of the other characters isn't really so much active as he kind of hangs out in the shadows a little bit. A lot of the time, he's not like Tony Curtis, who is, constantly moving and constantly scheming and things like this. There's something about him that's strangely like immobile. Like a lot of the time when we see him, like sometimes he'll get up, but if he gets up and stands to have a conversation with you, that's when it's real. Like a lot of the other scenes are him like sitting in a restaurant. Yeah. He's sitting in a restaurant and he's like eating, and he couldn't give it. He's like, no, I'm doing something else. He couldn't be bothered to give, you the time of day.
There's a phone at his restaurant table you have to call to ask permission to approach.
Yes. Yeah, and people will walk by and like ask for things, and he'll just be like, no, fuck you. Like the way that Lancaster plays him, it's very very casually powerful, but like the way that they shoot him is like unbelievable. Like you totally get that. They shoot him constantly at a low angle with lights like directly over his head, creating these like very like evil like shadows on his face, and
the glasses.
He's just commanding with the glasses. Yes. And he's just like commanding people to do things. And the relationship that he has with Tony Curtis is really interesting because, again, Tony Curtis, we've mentioned, mostly known at this time for, he's a romance comedy kind of pretty boy. And he fought for this role because he wanted to play something, that kind of broke that image and, made people think of him as, more of a diverse actor that could play more roles than just, the heartthrob. And so, you understand why a role this slimy and sort of unromantic and unheroic kind of, appealed to him in that way. But the relationship that he has to JJ is like, he's like the little rat that gets commanded all of the seedy little poisonous bidding that he has. Like
even when he approaches him for the very first time at the restaurant where they have that awesome like phone conversation in order to get permission to approach him. The very first thing that JJ does is like get a waiter to come by and just be like, get this man out of here. And it's only until he presents him with something that he's interested in, I think it was something to do with his sister, that he allows him to sit beside him and, be a part of the business. But until that point, he's just like, get this guy the fuck away from me.
There's an excellent behind the scenes story about that approach, by the way, which is that apparently Burt Lancaster was furious at like the initial script suggestion that JJ would slide over and ever allow Tony Curtis's character like to sit next to him to the point where like he was so angry at that he allegedly like threw the table set on the ground until they compromised. So the compromise is that Tony Curtis pulls a chair from somewhere else and sits next to him, but slightly behind him. And I honestly think that's better for the movie.
It is. I mean, diva move, but I think honestly a good creative choice. So I'm glad that he fought for it so aggressively, I guess.
The ends justify the means in this case.
That's right. That's right. Flip as many tables as you want, Lancaster.
Yeah, it definitely, they use a lot in the intensity of the performances and in, again, little visual tricks like that. They really do get you to understand the power dynamics of what you're witnessing here, which is that this guy has all the power in the world. And, the other guy is, sort of the guy who's willing to get his hands dirty for him in the places he can't really go to anymore. But beyond that, if he's not useful in that realm, then like why the fuck would he ever, like this guy is beneath him. He's lower than his nose. He doesn't want to be able to smell him in his vicinity. Like get this man out of here. The first conversation they have on the phone is him saying it's very similar to Night in the City, where he said that you've got it all but you're a dead man. What is it that JJ says? He says, you're dead, son. Get yourself buried.
Yeah. Well, you do it yourself. I do like that implication.
Meanwhile, seconds earlier, what was it that it's Tony playing Sidney Falco? Falco says describes JJ as his best friend in the world. Literally seconds before that phone conversation happens to his sister. Because for anyone who hasn't seen it, the very basic plot, and I do love how simple the plot of this is. A lot of the complications
it feels
are
so complicated, but like when he starts scheming and all of that. But yeah, continue.
It's very wordy and complicated in terms of the character work that's being done. But what's so interesting is how simple what ultimately is happening here is, which is that Sidney Falco, he is this press agent who's trying to get space in JJ's column because he needs that space to help promote his artists, which gets him paid. But he is being sort of shut out by JJ because JJ is very angry with him. And the reason he's angry with him is because his sister, Susie, is in a relationship with a jazz guitarist musician. And he doesn't like that. And prior to the film, it's kind of implied sort of historically that already Falco has supposed to have already broken them up. And he said that he did, and he got paid for it or whatever was supposed to happen. But they've been seeing each other behind the scenes, and he didn't actually break them up. And now they are looking to actually get married, which sends things into kind of like the next gear. It's very serious. It's a lot harder to break up if they are, that committed to each other.
Yes.
So the entirety of this film becomes, can Sidney Falco stay afloat in his business as a press agent while also, absolutely destroying this, very genuine relationship between these two love-struck kids, essentially.
Yeah. I found one of the core differences too between this and Night in the City, just in how they do character stuff, is that it's so hyper focused on the lead here and his scheming to the point where every character that not everyone, but most characters that he interacts with almost become completely disposable. Like they don't even take the time for them in the movie a lot of the time. Like they don't flesh them out as much as they do in Night in the City. And I like that though, the way that it applies this. It leads to kind of like you not knowing whether or not you should try to be getting to know a character each time he talks to somebody different. But what I do like about it is that it just expresses how much he feels these people are disposable when he's going through his scheming and trying to just get what he needs to, whether it be survive, succeed, whatever it is.
Yeah, there's also these really great cinematography by James Wong Howe, who we previously talked about because he shot Seconds, which is
awesome.
like one of the films that we really loved on this show. It's incredible looking film. But he also did Fantasia, The Thin Man, very well-known cinematographer. And there's something I think really special about the way that he follows Falco around, which is that the camera moves with the with the game that he's kind of playing in his head. I really like the first sequence when he goes to the jazz bar and there's these great movement on the band that's playing, and Steve is obviously the guitarist there who is hooked up with Susie, and he's there to essentially scheme and try to break this couple up because they're supposed to have already been broken up, and the manager even basically lies to him and says he thinks that they have been broken up.
And Steve is the squarest jazz performer of all time.
So funny.
Definitely. Yeah.
The critic comes up to him, and what does the critic say? I thought it was so funny. I had to write it down. It was like he's a combination of traditional form and progressive style. And I was like, he was not moving. This is like the cleanest, least rowdy jazz performance you've ever seen in film.
Yeah, because like every other time we've seen it in these older films, especially in like this era, it's almost always portrayed like they're drinking heavily, smoking weed, shooting up heroin, like just going nuts. And yeah, he's like the most clean cut. Like,
what was that one we talked about with Peter Labuza? Was it the Phantom Lady? The one where
and it goes into like the underground jazz scene at a certain point.
Yeah, and there's like a whole sequence where like literally the hypercut playing of the instruments becomes like this erotic sensation for the characters and stuff. Like there's none of that energy here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
they discovered very quickly that Steve Dallas, the actor playing Steve Dallas, could not even pretend to play guitar well. So they kind of shot around that and surrounded him with actual jazz musicians, hoping that would draw the attention away.
Yeah. But I like the way that the camera follows Falco's train of thought, the way that he snoops and creeps and spies. What's this Steve says? I wonder, he says, you scratch for information like a dog instead of just asking like a man. Yeah. And the way that the camera follows him, like, you know, he'll be half talking to Rita, his friend who's a waitress at the bar, or I guess friend in quotation marks, we'll say, because we have a scene to talk about later. Yeah. He'll be talking to Rita, who like needs help from him, and you know he'll be having that conversation, reverse shot with her. And then the camera will like pan around as he instead starts watching Steve and his manager, because he's actually not listening to her. He's not there. He doesn't care about her. Right. He's there specifically for, you know, the scheme that he's playing. And the camera absolutely just, it flows with him and the way that he maneuvers and how little, you know, he thinks of a lot of the people around him, which is, you know, again, something very similar to Night in the City. But I do think that there's something interesting about how it really locks you into, you know, how ruthless Falco is, even just in the actual minutia of the plans that he's orchestrating. And there are a couple moments like that in Night in the City that I was talking about, like the one where you watch him play the Strangler and Gregorius off each other, which ends up resulting in Gregorius's death, which is, you know, really, really brutal. So both of these films, I think, have something to say about, you know, these characters being very skilled at what they do,
but nothing quite like
bad.
Yeah. And nothing quite like, and more detail later, of course, but with like Rita, like we never have a scene in Night in the City, I think, that's arguably as scummy and sleazy as the one where he tries to set up the cigarette waitress, or Rita, I believe.
Yep.
And so that is for me, that was, and I'm sure many others that have watched the movie, it was a core difference in their characters there, because that was just, it's one of the grossest scenes in the film for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
which I guess
that's a really painful scene.
Yeah, it's core difference in their character there for sure.
Mm-hmm.
The ways that they use people are very different.
Yeah. Because at least it felt like at least with Harry, it's like he's using them, yes, but he almost feels like he's trying to set them up so everybody wins, even though it's completely misguided. Whereas Falco it's completely self-interested, and at a certain point, I guess, just for like survival. So he just does some of the grossest shit in this film.
Yeah, although I do like that they make clear that even unlike Night in the City, where you do get some sort of the way that they shoot the London location work and the way that they shoot how desperate and sweaty he is, you get some idea that you think that he's kind of like this poor guy who is trying to survive. And yes, he could decide to just go put in a day's work, but there is a pickup on South Street, like street level. We are doing this because we have to.
Yes,
there is a really interesting clarification that they make in this film where, you know, his secretary literally says, like, why do we need to do this? Like, you do pretty well as a press agent. Like, you could just be a press agent. Like, you make good money. You have a decent office. You know, you're not like JJ successful, but you're successful enough.
And we see other press agents within the orbit of JJ, or even who are rivals to JJ, that seem to at least have a decent life doing that.
Right.
Yeah. But what is it? What does he say? He says, it's not enough because he needs to get way up high where it's always balmy, where no one snaps his fingers and says, hey, shrimp, rack the balls, or hey, mouse, go out and buy me a pack of butts. We will have to get into how the dialogue in this film is absurd.
Nonstop metaphors, puns, just it never stops.
I couldn't stop taking down notes and just writing down like entire quotes.
We can easily do a quote off by the end of this thing.
Yeah. I got a bunch written down just myself, but he basically says, you know, that he doesn't want tips from the kitty. He wants to be in the big game with the big players. Right. he's in a dog eat dog world, and he's willing to do the dog eating essentially.
Exactly.
There is a really wonderful contrast too in Mary from the last movie and Tony Curtis's secretary in this movie, where like the secretary in this movie is so exhausted by the schemes at this point. Like there is such a like weight to her expressions and her body language. Like you can tell that she still very much cares about Sidney Falco, but like there's kind of a resignation that it's never going to be better than this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I like the scenes with her when he goes up to her and he's like, watch me run a 500-yard dash with my legs cut off after he realizes that, his client isn't going to get space in JJ's column because he hasn't done the job yet. And then there's another great scene later, which is, I think, another really like one that really puts you into the perspective of how he works in a really cool way, which is the one where he goes to the editor of the Globe, the paper, who we see in the opening scene is like one of the most read papers in the city,
because it's JJ's paper.
Montage. Right. Yes, and it is the opening montage is like cars driving around, delivery truck driving around like Times Square and like throwing papers at everyone and everyone reading, going, "Oh my God, it's the early edition. We all have to know what tomorrow's news is." What he wrote, and he gets a glimpse at the early. What is going to print, and he sees that JJ has written this really nice review of this comedian that he saw who doesn't have a publicist, and he is just writing a nice review just because he genuinely really liked the performance. And you could just see Falco immediately go, I need to go get my hands on that guy and find out I need to become his publicist. Mm-hmm. And there's something so amazing about watching him use that information and then go to the guy and make this huge gambit play where he's just like, you say you don't need a promoter, but I'm a great promoter and I could get you in JJ's column by tomorrow. He knows already that the guy is going to be written up in JJ's column tomorrow. He literally has the quotation on him. And he says, so he fakes this phone call with the secretary. And I love the secretary who picks up and realizes that he's not actually talking to her after about 30 seconds and just like puts the phone down and lets him keep talking.
It happens so like every day.
Exactly. Like it's so casual for her. Yeah.
And what a great scene that like lets you into the process of how he works is that immediately he takes information. He goes, how can this information work for me? How can I trick everyone into thinking that, this information actually came from me and I have the power of it? And like, it's crazy.
And I really want to draw attention to that phone call as well, because Tony Curtis, the way he acts it is so beautifully like, it's almost this like fantasy role play for Sidney as well, imagining this world where JJ respects him so much and that like he really gets into the acting of it, not just in the quote, but just every little bit of his physicality and his voice and everything is just like, this is how he wishes people were excited to hear. Like he gets to tell JJ like, no, we're not going to lunch. I'll see you at dinner, buddy.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly. He can't help himself but add those like little casual conversation things to make him seem kind of cool.
Yeah, he's important. He's a big player.
Yeah, exactly.
Even if he's only performing it, and he's gonna impress the people who think that. And because again, the next day the paper is gonna say that because it's already being edited, it's already being made up. So the people who overheard that conversation he just had are gonna be like, wow, that guy's a big shot. Oh my god.
And it might be the only scene we don't see Tony Curtis doing something on JJ's behalf. So I really love its presence though, because it does suggest that like, how many customers has he gotten this exact same way by just pre-quoting JJ's column?
Right.
Yeah, like that. Yeah, that's why I like that. I really like being let into the process of how this guy works and the craft that he actually does. And it's very funny from his perspective, and the way that we watch it. It's very exhausting. Like the work that he puts in. It's similar to Night in the City, where you have to see Harry. But there's something a little bit more suave about Falco. He seems a little bit more in control. He's not quite sweating as much. He's not quite as desperate. He's just very, very good. And I love the way that JJ describes that, which is in this big monologue he gets at that table when Falco gets, he worms his way into the table by saying that he has information and a message from his sister. And the message is that they are going to get married, and that's going to, really trigger the next like 24 hours of the film, which I do appreciate. Actually, it basically is like 24 hours. We need to break up this relationship for good. How do we pull it off? What are the machinations and the manipulations to pull that off? But before that, he's trying to describe, because I think he's at like a dinner table with a senator.
Yes.
Like literally a sitting U.S. senator. And there's a part where he answers the phone and he basically like ruins someone's career like right then and there. And I love that Tony Curtis is like, Senator, do you believe in capital punishment? Because I don't remember what's the exact line.
Because you
like,
just watched a man put to death.
Yes. And then the senator goes like, Mr. Falco, like, let's figure out kind of who you are. And JJ gives this big monologue, which I think is really great, where he says, Mr. Falco, he's not an actor. He's not like they guess that he's an actor because he's so pretty, which is true of Tony Curtis. But they say he is a man of 40 faces, not one, none too pretty, and all deceptive.
Yeah. The tricks of his slimy trade.
Yeah, it's a charming street urchin face.
Oh God.
Yeah, so like that.
I actually love the scene that follows that line exactly too, where he asks Sydney, "Match me, Sydney," talking about his cigarette, and Sydney goes, "Not right this minute, JJ." And he only does that in that scene because Sydney, for 1 second, feels like he has the upper hand of information. Like any other scene, he will gladly light his cigarettes, but this 1 second, he can't do it because no, I've got something you don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also he just like blisteringly insulted him in like the fanciest prose that you could have. And he was like, yeah, I actually have some power here, so I'm going to say, no, I'm not going to do that. Because I think they ask him after, like, what does a press agent do? And he's like, a press agent is meant to eat a columnist's dirt and call it manners. There's so many great lines in this, like the senator right after that saying to JJ, "Why is it everything you say sounds like a threat?"
and it's because it is. Like, I mean, that is JJ's power, is that he not only can control the public narrative, but he can look you dead in the eye and tell you, this is the narrative I'm going to give you, and unless you dance the way I want you to dance, it's what the world is going to think about you tomorrow.
Yeah, everyone knows him, and he just commands the room and the conversation. And as we saw with that phone call, he can literally destroy people like on the spot if he feels like it.
He threatens to destroy the senator just because he susses out that, like, oh, this young blonde that's not your wife that's here with you, is there something there? Can I tell people that this is something?
Yeah. He literally hones in on it and goes, yeah, I don't believe that, Manny here is her agent. I have a feeling you're just saying that and you want to carry your mistress around with you to dinner and ruining your family man image. And the senator is like, and that's the end of the conversation.
Yeah, he's like, that's good advice. And he's like, great, you can appear on my TV show next week if you want to make it up to me.
Yeah. Yeah, goddamn. So there is something to be said about how they really capture, this power that JJ has. That is, there's almost no resisting it. You might as well just flow with it in some ways, even if what it's asking you to do is like really, really terrible shit, which ends up being the experience of Sidney Falco, who, has to break up his sister and this musician's relationship. And in order to do that, he's got to do some really filthy stuff to make that happen.
Let's talk about that, though, because there's something really fascinating about the character of J.J. Hunsaker himself, which is, he even remarks, I love this dirty town. And
great line.
But he is so honed in on exposing and knowing about everyone else's perversities and everyone else's vices. But he's so repressed in his manner that he seems to have like very few of his own, except for this morbid, some would possibly describe as almost incestuous obsession with like suppressing his sister. And also just preserving his own power and influence. But like the influence itself is the thing, but like he doesn't seem to have any joy in life other than just maintaining this image and forcing his sister to live the way that he sees fit for her.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, he is interestingly drawn in that way. Although I do think that he comes alive a little bit in that scene where he does say, "I love this dirty town," and he's out on the street and he's just like navigating what he knows so well. He's talking.
It's like
with
the only
that,
time he expresses beyond
cop.
rage. It's when he's expressing his love for this filthy, sleazy town that he works with.
Yeah, and how much power and control over it he has. I love that bit where he's waiting for information from the corrupt cop on like this like suicidal actress, and then he finds out over the radio that she's just died, and he can now write it and get, break the story in his column. And the idea of like, a Hollywood reporter guy going out onto the street talking to a corrupt cop and, writing about suicidal actresses. This is just all in a day's work, man.
Yeah.
My right hand hasn't seen my left hand in 30 years.
Beautiful
is
line.
a great line that he gets in that scene. Because, the dude is not, that's not the kind of work that he does. So it's up to Sidney with his plan to break up his sister and this musician's relationship. But yeah, you never really find out explicitly why he wants to do that beyond that, he can't have her choosing her own future. He controls this town, and nothing that will happen in this town that he doesn't, sign off on. So essentially,
I will say that allegedly Ernest Lehman knew something that a lot of the readers of Walter Winchell did not at the time, which was that Winchell had a similar obsession with controlling the life of his daughter Walda. Bought her very expensive mink coats, had her institutionalized for a period when she dated someone he didn't approve of. And she was the only person that came to his funeral in the end, despite how famous he once was.
Wow.
So that is some sad shit.
So yeah, that there was a deliberate angling to the real man Hunsaker is based on that no one in the audience could have been aware of.
Oh, wow.
Goddamn. Yeah. Well, shit. That absolutely tracks. Although you do think that Burt Lancaster, you do wonder, dude's a good looking dude. You're like, why can't you just go do something else, Or why can't you just be happy with the things that you have? Why can't you just be happy for your sister a little bit?
There's that deeply creepy shot of her coming into his office, and he has that massive framed photo of her while he's looking at her.
Yes. Yeah, I have that written down. That's so terrifying.
And there's never
it reminded
scene.
me of
Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, there's never a scene where he interacts with another woman. Like there's not one where it seems like he has any type of real, I don't know, human
There's no attraction.
Need to. Yeah. Like he doesn't feel like he's attracted to really anybody. It's just business is, I guess, his love. And I think it would make me feel like maybe he only wants her to be with someone that is up like at his high ranking in the world, but it just feels strange for him to not have any interest, like love interest whatsoever, while controlling his sister at the same time. It's like it just adds another touch to the weirdness.
The way that we see him, he has no actual personal life. Like going out for dinner with people is not like a thing that he enjoys doing. It's like business keeps happening at his table around him because everyone wants his attention, and because they want him to print something in his column or something like that. I do like some of the ways that they navigate in the film, the sort of industry dynamics of how to get something like into print. Because like part of Sidney Falco's like entire plan, which by the way, I love the way that he describes it. Cats in the bag and bags in the river.
One of the best lines ever.
So sick. And his plan to break up Steve and Susie is to plant a blind item in a column, which will, have just enough detail that people will know that it's Steve and it's Steve's band. But essentially suggesting that, they are, into the wrong sorts of town, that they are, what is it that they remark upon the stench or the odor, which is, you're meant to assume that, he's getting into jazz and he's also smoking up a little bit.
Right. He's smoking that reefer. The devil's lettuce.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which is enough that would just ruin your career.
Ruin your life.
And they imply that he's a red too, which again tying. There's a line about that. So they are tying him explicitly again into the McCarthyist side of the guy it was based on. So you're two things. You're a pot smoker and you're a commie. That's the worst stuff you could be in a column. Even if you're a jazz singer for some reason.
Yeah, you would think if he was like a politician, it would be more tricky.
Yeah,
but yeah,
you kind of assume at least half of that. Like one out of those two, he'd definitely be. You'd assume.
But I really love the sequence where he has to plant this blind item and he has to get someone to print it. And the first thing he assumes to do is to use some dirt that he has on a columnist, and it goes horribly wrong. Because the husband who he tries to, say, has been unfaithful to his wife, and he has proof that he's been messing around with the little cigarette girls and he can get him in trouble. And the guy goes, I'm not going to be blackmailed. It's not going to happen. The dude flat out on his face admits to his wife right in front of him and said, you know what? I got into a little bit of an oopsie. And I it was an accident, whatever. And the funniest part for me was that the wife goes, that's the most honest thing that you've done in years. I kind of respect it.
I forgive you.
And it totally works out for that guy.
So
but my favorite element of this is that before this, attempt to blackmail a columnist into getting this, this smear piece printed, the columnist says, you and JJ have like the scruples of a guinea pig and the morals of a gangster, which is a really great line, obviously.
Yeah.
But my favorite part about this is that when that goes wrong and there's a huge kerfuffle and there's a fight and, everyone knows that he fucked up and failed, but not everyone could overhear the precise details of the conversation. He immediately goes over to another writer and he uses the exact same insults that were just used on him and JJ to describe JJ to this other columnist, Otis, to try to win him over because he knows that Otis
hates JJ.
Hates JJ. So yeah, he immediately uses the exact same insults that were just used on him and JJ and uses them himself in order to win over this columnist to get the piece.
Well, and he tries to convince Otis, this rival columnist to JJ, like, hey, if you print this story about the sister's boyfriend, that's really going to embarrass JJ, isn't it? Like that was the reason for you to do this.
Yes. Yeah, that is so sick. But he's not won over by that because the dude's kind of a creep, and the dude instead wants a girl, and so. Or at least Falco offers him a girl.
Because he notices he's checking out all the waitresses in the restaurant.
And he knows
Rita so he was like, yeah. Because what's the line he gets to? He's like, I'd go a mile for a chuckle, 2 for a pretty girl. And then he goes, 3 miles for a pretty girl. And then he takes him back to his own apartment where Rita is waiting for him. And Rita was there, asking about the key underneath the mat or whatever to get in.
She thinks she's going to be there for like a date with Tony Curtis.
Yes. Yeah. So it's so brutal when, Falco gets back, and in order to get his hit piece printed, he basically has to set up, that she's going to be used as a sex tool in this moment. And he pitches it to her and him basically together in the same room as each other, which is like such a crazy move to try to pull.
Yeah, real ballsy move right there. Also, the fact that she at first is just like fuck you, you're a snake, whatever, and then he goes into the room to further convince her to do it, and he starts saying like how he's a powerful man and you'd be stupid not to do it, and just a bunch of guilt tripping and manipulation. And it's like it's one thing to just make this happen to begin with, but then for her to outright be
to
very
really
upset,
coax her into it, even though she's crying
and aggressively push her into it, and then she's calling him a snake, and it's just it's a very, very gross scene. And then he even has to add because before we see him, and he's got a good sense of humor. We're talking about a lot of the great lines in this movie and stuff. And then it ends up leading to something that's actually really gross, which is right before he leaves. He says something like, now don't do anything I wouldn't do, which gives you a lot of leeway. And he has a fucking smile on his face. He's not even
Disgusting.
aware of what he's just done. Almost, it's just, or he just doesn't care. I don't know which, but it's just
I think honestly, it's just like it's just part of the par for the course for the kind of business that he does, and he's just like, brutal. Or the other line too that's really sickening, where he says, before she mentions that she had like an altercation kind of go wrong, and she sort of misread some signals on kind of like an important guy, and she said that eventually I kind of did get into the tropical island mood, but I was already kind of kicked out, and he uses that against her, like a thing that she was saying to him personally about a story about her. Yes. And then he says, how many drinks does it take to put you in the tropical island mood?
It's so
is what he says to
uncomfortable.
her.
And then he gives her more. Like, it's just, it's so disgusting. Oh my God. Yeah. And for him to do it with a smile on his face, like, just what a sleazy performance. Good. Well done, Curtis, on that one.
I could certainly see that being the scene that really revolts, like the teenage girls that come in just to see a pretty Tony Curtis.
Yeah, I mean, for me, this was there's a ton of disgusting shit in this, but that for me, that was definitely the big scene where I kind of had the recoiling and really just thought of this guy as a total scumbag now.
And you just can't know how far he's gonna go there. It's so awful.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're very nervous in that scene. Very nervous.
Yeah, because that's just it. Like, comparing this especially specifically with Night in the City, like on some level, by the end, you still kind of sympathize with Harry a little bit. Yeah. Like, he did some bad shit. He ruined some lives, but there was something, it's
that desperation again.
Outside of stealing her money, like, Mary is relatively untouched by the things he's doing.
Right.
Yeah. There's something. It's so crazy to have to add in a scene where he's like, trying to get like Mary raped or something, Right. Like if that happened, like it would, again, you would get this where you you're very, very put off. And it makes it's really, really ugly. And I think that's definitely, part of what the movie is getting at is especially how ugly these people have become while not seeing themselves in that way until until things kind of go wrong, as they always do in a movie like this. There's always some level of existential fatalism is on the way.
Yeah.
Although I will say the first time I watched this, I was kind of surprised about the exact twists and turns that we kind of got, because there's one very obvious one. And maybe we'll get there when we hit the climax. But there was one very obvious one where I was like, oh, the sister's going to kill herself. And that's not what happens. But he does get this column successfully put into the paper. It does start getting people talking about Steve. And, it does ruin the sister's plans to talk to JJ the next morning and tell him about how she is going to marry him, because now, there's some mud in the column, is I think what Rita describes it as. And yeah, there's something interesting to this where like Falco is so excited about how he's kind of won. He's almost acting like a little boy. I think they describe him as the way that he moved. Like he's a boy stealing gum from a slot machine or something. What is it that she says?
I don't know if I wrote that one.
I didn't either, but it's something to that effect.
Yeah, that's the one where he's doing the whole thing where he's trying to get the column that's already pre-written and using it to his advantage and everything from the editor, because it's set up that he kind of actually previously has a relationship where he either sleeps with or bribes the woman who edits the Globe as well. He has all kinds of those conversations where you're like, does he have a personal relationship with this person, or does he blackmail them?
Yeah. I think he flirts with her a lot, but. What's interesting is this is supposed to be like someone that's connected to JJ, and to my knowledge, we never see a scene where she interacts with JJ. It's always Tony Curtis.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Could just speak to like maybe he doesn't even JJ doesn't even speak to the lower people for him that he actually works
he just sends the papers in and you deal with it. Like
yeah, exactly.
But this sets off like a huge issue, and the issue becomes that Steve, he knows that Falco and JJ don't like him, So he immediately, despite all of the performance and all of the kerfuffle and everything surrounding it, he just immediately goes, I know that they planted this story on me, and he immediately confronts him about it. And what he doesn't realize that this is actually kind of part of their plan. They want to create a rift between Steve and JJ that makes it look like it's Steve's fault, so that Susie, will be caught in the middle of a fight between, this fiance and her brother, but in a way that's going to make the fiance look really bad, like he's the aggressor in that particular situation. And this is part of the sort of machinations of the plan that they are putting forth. And there's a lot of really great moments that kind of come out of this. Again, great lines of dialogue. Your mouth is as big as a basket and twice as empty, I think is one that Falco says to Steve. Because he's like, what, you're saying I got a smear article written about you in a column from a guy who hates JJ. The guy who hates JJ is doing him a favor, which is, I guess, a brilliant move by getting Otis.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he's like, sound logic. Why not me? Why didn't I do it? And a lot of this ends up getting into there's a big sequence that takes place where this all kind of comes to a fold, where it's Steve and JJ actually kind of like meet up, and JJ doesn't fully understand the extent to what Falco had planned, because he's actually really upset with Falco at first, because he's kind of like, Susie, you just really upset her. And now, I have to try and get him his job back. And that's not really like the position I want to be in. You didn't destroy him enough. He, it hasn't worked yet.
It's also got one of Lancaster's best lines when Curtis calls him up. He says, "You sound happy, Sidney. Why should you be happy when I'm not?"
Yeah. Is that the bit too? Because I think I wrote this down somewhere. Is that the bit too where when he first picks up the phone, he literally doesn't put it to his ear for like 20 seconds as like Sidney is talking to him? Like, what a power move. Like, he just doesn't, he's like, I'm going to finish typing out this line first before I actually give you the time of my day, by even just fucking picking up the phone.
So good.
Yeah. But yeah, I really like the scene where Sidney makes the plan clear to him, where he says, JJ, like, look what I've done. Your sister thinks that you have in the palm of your hands the power to save this guy, but this guy's not going to accept it because he's a blustering, righteous dude who just stormed into my office and accused me and, freaked out. And, he's going to do the same to you, and he's going to do it in front of your sister. It's going to look really bad. And I think he asks him like, how do you know that this is, going to happen? And he says, because he has integrity. He has acute integrity, like indigestion. And I never thought that I'd make a killing on a guy's integrity. And JJ immediately clicks into the plan. He's like, oh, like he's actually using this guy's sort of straight man honesty that he has like against him as part of this performance that they're setting up. And as soon as JJ realizes how like evil that is, in a way, that he's using his good qualities to destroy him, he's like, I would hate to take a bite out of you. You're a cookie full of arsenic.
Yes. One of the all-time great noir lines.
That stuff is so good. And another sequence that's really perverse is the one where he gets to play the good brother to Susie when Susie is like trying to leave, and he like calls her in, and he's explaining the situation that she's in and everything like that. But he gets to put on the show of being like this perfect brother, and the way that Lancaster plays it is like, he's selling that he really cares about his sister, and he kind of likes her choice of boyfriend, and he supports her in all of this. But we obviously know that he is the one who is pulling the strings on the fiance's demise. And there's something so perverse about having that knowledge and watching him put on this convincing performance in front of her.
And this is the scene where he himself has 40 faces. Like, he strikes all these different tones. He's the brother, but then he's kind of paternal, and he's kind of strict, and he's kind of like, he gets to play all these different modes all at once. And it's about as animated as he gets in the entire movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's really the only sequence we see where he's like what his idea of a personal relationship would be, and it's one filled with so much manipulation that you're kind of blown away, and immediately too the way that he's like, I'll get Steve back his job because he means this much to you. And, she kind of like demands it of him a little bit. And he's just like, I like this new attitude that you've got. You're not limp or dependent, even though, he's constructing a world where she's going to be more dependent on him while saying, you're doing well, girl. You're as independent as I've ever seen you. Anyway, I'm going to place this call and we're going to destroy your life.
Yeah.
But yeah, this leads to some really interesting places where like I wouldn't say it becomes hard to follow, but it moves really fast. I don't know if you guys had that experience. It moves really, really fast through those through these conversations, as because all of the different agendas kind of start bouncing off of each other, and in some ways kind of like tearing little shreds into each other a little bit and stuff like that. And there's something I find so painful about the big scene where Steve and JJ confront one another, and he gets to put on this big performance where
in his empty TV studio. So again, we're at a stage.
Yes.
It is a performance.
Yeah.
Yes. Huge performance, and he goes, I don't take kindly to you and Falco teaching me ethics and stuff like that, and it's very big words, and obviously we know that he's absolutely right, but they're putting on the performance that he's not, and they have all of the sort of image is all on their side. They're playing off his righteous anger to make him look brash.
There is a beautiful scene here too, where two beautiful scenes, but the first one is when Falco is sitting in like the stands, and JJ goes to sit beside him, and he's insulting Falco this entire time. Like, he is just saying, like, if a man like this ever came near my sister, I would beat him to death with a baseball bat or something like that.
Yeah, he said, I'd take a baseball bat and break it over his head.
And while he's saying these insults, unlike the dinner scene where Curtis would not even strike a match for him, he is holding his lighter out to light a cigarette before Lancaster even asks for it. It's such a great little bit of business.
Yeah.
And that's right. Yeah, that's right before Steve says, do you suppose when Tony Curtis dies, they're going to send him to dog and cat heaven? Again with the dog imagery.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I like too the bit where they're trying to get Susie involved in it, and he's like, "Why don't you speak up, dear? What's your opinion, dear?" He's like, "Your dears sound like daggers," and you're making her like afraid to speak. And then they kind of do this cold stare at each other, and JJ says, "If looks could kill, I'd be dead."
The blocking of that scene is brilliant too, because you have Steve, you have Tony Curtis, you have Burt Lancaster and Steve's manager, and they're all very prominent in the foreground, and they're all talking around Susie, who is in the background and gets increasingly smaller and blocked out by them. They're all talking about her future. She has no say, and like she gets smaller and smaller as she kind of walks away and sits down and just gives up completely. It couldn't have been blocked better for that shot.
Yeah, and she and that's what's so interesting about this too, is that by the end of where we end up to, we can tell that she knows what's happening too. Everyone can feel where this is all coming from, that this big song and dance that they're putting on is really for themselves, so that they don't have to look like bad people for doing the things that they want to do. That's literally all it is. But even though everybody fucking knows, they're literally just toying with these people's lives, like right in front of them. And when he eventually coaxes Steve into get so angry that he calls him a national disgrace, not a glory, including his writing, and that he deals in slimy scandals and everything. They force him to explode at him in a really public way, so that it's not JJ's fault that JJ has to go over to Susie and say, "You can't see that man anymore. Because look what he said about me. How could you be with someone who said that about your brother, even though I didn't even do anything?" He gets to appear wounded and hurt and righteous while also telling forcing his sister to, not pursue her love interest. And despite all of the language and the performance of it all being correct, something just still feels really wrong about it. And Susie ends up kind of running away and knowing that she has to cut it off, and she does cut it off. But there's something even more layered into the sadness of her cutting it off, which is she's not cutting it off because Steve got angry and Steve said something, and she's cutting it off because her brother is dangerous. Yeah. That is actually what she says, and that he is going to hurt you. I see what it is that he's, doing to you. And, I can't change who my brother is. And Steve gets this really sad line about how, the goodbye that she is saying sounds like it's, she's a ventriloquist dummy that her brother is operating and stuff like that. Really brutal, kind of situation where both of these people know exactly what's happening, but they basically can't prove it,
Yeah.
That's all there is to it. They put on the best show imaginable between Falco and JJ.
She would be happier knowing that he's safe somewhere else where her brother won't write about him anymore.
Yeah. Brutal. She's just like, my brother is capable of great harm. And I would rather see you alive and happy and working than be involved in your destruction. Simply by just being related to my brother who wants to see your downfall.
And meanwhile, JJ still wants Steve to be destroyed, even though they are breaking things off. And
he's won.
Even though he's won, yeah, exactly. But I love that he frames it. It's no longer about his sister Susie. It is now because Steve had the nerve to insult his readership.
Yes,
the American people, goddammit,
and this great country.
Yeah, my 60 million believers. He insulted all of those men and women by saying that I'm no good.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And so, ultimately that leads him to get Falco to go one step further. And even though he's won, to still destroy Steve even further by planting drugs on him and using the corrupt cop to arrest and beat him and hospitalize him, scare him, get him arrested.
I love,
and, get him ruined.
I love the way that they shoot that scene too, because they set it up like Sidney comes out of the bar that he knows that Steve is about to leave at, and he kind of has a little conversation with the corrupt police, and they don't like each other. He calls him like a fat slob and shit like that. But then the camera follows him up onto the bridge so that you still see the two cops waiting for Steve, and Steve coming out of the bar, but it's from a very far away. And then the camera just kind of gets closer and closer as Steve is closed in on, up until a point where it does this really awesome zoom in as it shows kind of like the shock and frightened state that Steve's in. And instead of actually showing the violence, like the cops beating him up, it just cuts to a cymbal hit and like the band playing this like really sporadic jazz song, and that's how they express the beating. And I thought that was just a very cool way of doing it, and created a lot of tension. I really like the build up to that moment.
Yeah, I love the part where the cops are following beside him in the car, and they like sort of slink out of the car as they're about to like get him. Yeah, there's a lot of great little like,
and it's visual, straight mafia mode. Like it's like these are cops. It's just such a
it's true police brutality. Like
right, exactly.
Yeah, and too the bit where because Falco, he kind of knows what he's doing is really wrong at this point, but he's kind of like, I'm in too deep, whatever, it's going to be done. But when he plants the drugs into his coat, and then the manager comes up and says like, you guys have done it, like he's won. Like they broke it off. JJ wins. He gets all the marbles. Like, leave them alone. And he still decides, I'm gonna not take the drugs out. I'm gonna still ruin this kid's career anyway.
The scene of him being convinced for that is really, really good, because Falco does express to JJ, he's like, I would never do this. This is too low even for us. Like, this is too much. And like, it's not Burt Lancaster that suggests anything that convinces him. It is Sidney himself. Like, he starts talking to her like, I would not do it for all the money in the world. I wouldn't do it for this. I wouldn't even do it for a column. And then he stops himself for a second. And like you see that smirk slide across Burt Lancaster's face, like, oh, is that how cheap your soul is? Like, you know, he goes like, oh, well, who do you think is going to write my column for me, Sydney, when I'm away for 3 months on a vacation with my sister to console her over this situation? Like, you're going to do that. Yeah. And that's all
Which
it takes.
Which is weird, too, by the way. I just want to throw that out there. Anyway.
Come on, JJ. I like the line that he gets in that scene where he's like, it's one thing to wear your dog collar. When it turns into a noose, I choose freedom or something. And what is it the cop says to him, too? I appreciate your looking out for the virtue of this city, is what he says to him after he's just planted the...
What's the cop's other line later when like Sydney's like leaving? He's like, come back here. I want to castigate you.
Yeah. But this leads to a really big climactic sequence where he's out partying and he's given out the, you know, he's done it. He has got into the big game. He is successful. Everything he's done, all it came to was the beating of this poor innocent man who just had integrity. And he's actually gotten so successful he doesn't even care that comedian who he tried to represent earlier comes up to him at the bar and it's like, hey, you can sign me now. I saw that you did get me written up in JJ's paper, which he actually didn't, but he believes he did, and he just couldn't care less. Both one because you think he's a little bit, he's getting drunk because he's a little bit upset about what he's done. But also, he's also done it and it's over and he's made it.
He calls the guy a bread and butter account to his face.
Yes. He's like, I have a column now. Fuck you. But he gets a call to go to JJ's apartment where he finds Susie out on the balcony at night, the curtain billowing. And the obvious visual threat there is that it's going to mirror what JJ was writing about earlier, the actress who committed suicide by jumping.
But he assumes JJ called him to the house.
Yes. Which is really interesting kind of moment because he has to kind of like sneak his way in. The door's kind of open. He doesn't really know what's going on, and he's like, why is JJ not even here? Why is it just Susie? And Susie is acting in basically complete turmoil. That she doesn't care anymore. Why did you and JJ do it? And, now you're going to be the man who drove his beloved sister to suicide. And he's threatening him with that. He gets this big monologue too about,
oh, it's so gross.
How about she's a woman and so she needs to stop thinking with her hips and she needs to learn how to, hustle and get off her bird legs and learn how the world works.
A girl's best friend is her bed and all that stuff. It's
he says using her hips, it's her nature, like it's a man's nature to go out and get what he wants. So you can really get his whole worldview right in this little mini monologue here. And it is not good.
Yeah. But the really important element of it is that, she is someone who is this young, brittle, innocent thing that doesn't understand how, navigating this world actually works, the cynical world that she's a part of. And the great part about this monologue is that he ends up being completely wrong. And that by attempting to commit suicide, she actually opens him up to the point where he's freaked out and he's shouting and he's apologizing, and just in time for JJ to show up and wonder what the hell is kind of going on. And
and to preface this, before JJ has a line where he says, "If you ever touch my sister, I'll beat your head in with a baseball bat." So there we go. Now we're here.
Yeah. So Susie has actually staged this series of events. Susie was the one who called Falco and who called JJ and had them meet each other, and is now having them meet each other, not understanding what's happening. JJ thinks that, Falco is making some sort of move, and Falco thinks that, they successfully broke Susie, which to some degree, they kind of did, but she, she's not completely helplessly broken is what ends up being kind of the twist of this sequence, which I think is, really well set up.
Yeah.
And yeah, so Susie set Falco up to make it look like he's lying about her committing suicide. And then as a result, they start getting into a fight and he starts like confessing and revealing the plan and basically, confirming the truth that she knew all along. And now she knows 100%. She gets them playing off each other and betraying each other, basically doing the reverse of the performance sequence we were talking about before, where they were trying to play them.
I like the line too that JJ gets. He says something like, he calls out a supposed lie that Falco is saying, not knowing that Susie knows that he's lying. And I just love that, like that triangle that forms as soon as all of the lies are exposed, but JJ still doesn't quite know who knows what. It's really good character work there.
Yeah, he tries to pin it all on Falco.
Yeah, right.
And as Falco is leaving, he gets this great line where he says, "You got such contempt for people, it makes you stupid. You didn't beat those kids, you lost them. You'll never get her back." As he's trying to like call the police and say, "Oh my God, Falco working by himself planted this marijuana on that poor young man. I had nothing to do with this." Just laying it on thick to the point where, he drove them back together, trying to destroy Steve. And what does she say to him? "I'd rather be dead than living with you."
Yeah. And then I should hate you, but I don't. I just pity you. There's just nothing left. And that's really, and like JJ, that really is his only, it seems, motivation, connection in the world, whatever it may be. It seems strange, but the way that he applies it anyway, but it is.
Yeah, the only vulnerable expression Lancaster gets is when he looks over that balcony as she walks into Times Square.
And he looks actually saddened. Yeah.
Yeah, and Susie gets to walk into the sunrise past Falco getting beaten up by the cops in the middle of the street.
Yep.
And she walks into those dirty streets like now a player. She's the one who set that whole situation up. She's not just a victim anymore. She is, she has emotionally ruined JJ and physically ruined Falco.
Yeah.
As she literally walks by it.
And it implies that she's also heading towards Steve, who's in the hospital, correct? So that they can reunite.
Yes.
Yeah.
So he literally did drive them back together, which is exactly which is exactly what Falco said would happen. He was like, "Dude, you've already won. They've already broken up. Why do you need this extra victory of destroying him?"
Yeah.
Yeah. And instead it totally flips on him and doesn't work at all.
He's undone by the one narrative he can't control.
Yeah. Great stuff.
Yeah. Really, really great stuff. And again, also, this is such a writerly film. I feel like we spent a lot of time on some of the dialogue and the plot in this one, just because a lot of it's so great.
Yeah.
But really great sense of atmosphere to it as well.
I love the way they shoot the city, just everyone moving in the background.
That's what I was going to say too.
It's awesome. Yeah, it's great.
Well, and they said that they couldn't avoid that because literally they were shooting on these really busy streets, and they said that there were times where Tony Curtis fangirls were toppling police barricades to get onto the set and shit.
That's unreal.
So the intensity of how busy just the New York location shooting was, and how sort of chaotic and pungent they make the atmosphere of the film as well, and then the intensity of the performances that hammer home how devious and sort of morally bankrupt this sort of exhausting sense of ambition that these characters have is, and yeah, it's really sort of claustrophobic and calculating and eventually, really, when it wants to be very nasty and, inhuman sometimes, the way that they treat people, and getting you into the headspace of these characters who have just such a low opinions of the people around them and how they're all just tools for, their own designs and everything.
And it makes it so much grosser.
The style gets you into that too is well done.
Yeah. And it just makes it so much grosser. Like we said, that these characters a lot of the time don't need to be doing this stuff. It's all based on egotism and their place in the world and just their reputation. And so that once again, a core difference there. It's it's not desperation. These people are just doing it because they want a position in life, and it makes it just that much grosser.
Yeah, it makes it that much more dirty
Yeah.
and kind of menacing when you realize that, it literally is just power games, and the film, tries to make clear on the streets and the clubs and the restaurants that, there's a very clear hierarchy to the way that these characters interact with each other. And a lot of it is through talking, which is why we had to talk so much about the way that these characters speak to each other and the things that they say.
Yeah. Because a lot of it is just people trying to convince other people of things. And so it requires a lot of charisma.
Yeah.
It's something.
It's what really gets you to understand those power dynamics and who's playing who. It's very Billy Wilder is someone I thought about while watching this, and especially too because with the whole journalists are monsters angle, I was thinking a lot about Ace in the Hole,
definitely,
which we covered on this show like maybe a year or two ago for Noirvember as well. What were you going to say, Casey?
I was just going to say it's something that both movies do beautifully, which is that there are examples that we see in both movies of people living honest lives, or even if they're doing dishonest things, they're living honestly within those parameters, and that both Sidney Falco and Harry from Night in the City could have lived a better life if they had just sort of chosen to pick a lane within the pecking order and stuck to it, but their aspirations to be someone in the face of people who actually are someone destroy them.
Yep. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, pivoting towards reductive rating round on this one, because this has been a long episode, but these were two big movies, and I felt like they deserved the conversations. Jamie, I'm going to let you go first on this one.
Yeah, sure. I don't have too much more to add. I think the performances in this are unbelievable. We were just talking about how just writerly this movie is, and they have to give a lot of complicated dialogue at very high speeds a lot of the time, it seems, and just a lot of really good charismatic performances. I want to specifically say, because we were just talking about Lancaster and Curtis a lot, but Susan Harrison is also really, really good as the tragic sister. That moment, especially at the end when she's saying that she's going to commit suicide and kind of battling it out with Falco is fantastic. Really good stuff. And much like Night in the City, this movie just has a pacing that just never lets up. It never stops. Someone's always scheming. Someone's always trying to move forward to the next thing. And then eventually it's one of those films that all of that just kind of comes together and destroys the character. This one, it seemed it had a little bit less. We'll say Falco is, I would say, the most damage from this. You know what? Steve and Falco. You kind of forget about Steve there because he's not in the ending climax. But
that's true.
But there's a little bit at least more hope with the sister at the end there. Whereas with, I guess, Night in the City, it's completely bleak. Like nobody has any hope at the end of that. But I will say that this one also goes to some grosser places, like what we were talking about with Falco and that Rita scene with the cigarette waitress. Really sleazy stuff right there. So
people aren't murdered, but they're ruined in other ways.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. So yeah, this is really good stuff. I think for me, it's like in that high 4 area. I don't know if this would ever get the 5. I still find this is my second time watching it, but it was a year or two since I watched it last, and I still found just how fast moving the movie is to be a little bit complicated and confusing at times. But that being said, I still love all the writerly qualities of it and all that. So I wouldn't take anything away from it. It's just there's a lot coming at you all the time. And so I just think I want to revisit it again, really. So, yeah, for now, I think it's going to be a high 4.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat where I go into this every time being like, this is the one where it's really gonna click. This is gonna be like the super 5 for me, like it is for so many other people. But I kind of agree that the thing that kind of holds me back a little bit is that, despite the fact that I really like how writerly it is very, very writerly to the point where like characters are sometimes used as clever mouthpieces when I feel like there are stuff that could have been communicated with more, sort of expressionist filmmaking instead.
Sure.
In some cases, even though again, there's a lot of really great cinematography and a lot of really great, visual choices that they made with this film that I think, accentuate the character work. Like, again, a lot of the ways that they shoot JJ, a lot of the ways that they follow you in the headspace with Falco and everything like that. But it just doesn't get to that place where, a lot of the more bleak existential masterpieces of this genre do. And I think honestly, one of the reasons that it might do that is kind of stupid, is just that the stakes are a little low for me watching this. Like the emotional stakes are high. And usually stakes, being, small aren't really a problem. Sometimes I really like that. We just talked about Long Good Friday, and I really loved that the chaotic massacres that take place in that movie are over like $5,000. Like, it just really underscores the bleak point about, the violence and power that those characters wield. Yeah. But for me here, I do feel like they're trying to bring out, and they do in some of the writing and filmmaking, a real sense of danger and heartache to it. And the big climax of that, for me, just being a dude planting weed on another dude, I was expecting something, I think, a little bit more uglier the first time I watched it. It doesn't rival something like, I don't know, picking a noir out of a hat, The Big Heat. Sure. Where they look at like the internal ugliness of those characters is like really expressed in how, violent actions and, like when
coffee pot?
Lee Marvin disfigures that woman with a coffee pot.
Oh my God. Crazy.
Like really, really brutal. And I guess I'm not saying this movie needs to get, really violent or it needs to have a shootout to be better. It just feels like, for a movie that does get really down and dirty, and it does have some sequences that do, like the one that we talked about with Rita, especially. Yeah. I was expecting the climax to get a little bit dirtier.
There was an alternative ending where Susie both commit.
Was there?
There are several apparently scripted, but there was one where Susie did commit suicide, and there was another.
Oh wow! Oh my God!
There was another where Tony Curtis is murdered on the streets by the cops. So, okay,
I wonder if Tony Curtis being murdered might have done it for me. I don't know. Either way, it's not a huge deal.
I know that I do know that they imply it through kind of Steve that he's hospitalized, that he wasn't killed. But do they ever outright show or say if Curtis is killed?
They don't. So no. I still take it to think that he is, but
that's what I thought. But it is hard to say because it's based on like a physical beating. So he could just be knocked out and really, really hurt.
Yeah.
I don't know.
The way that I viewed it is that it just mirrors what happened to Steve, which is he just gets beaten by the cops.
Yeah. That would make sense.
But yeah, hard to say. But either way, doesn't take too much away from it because, again, the emotional clarity and severity of what they've done to the sister, and how they've manipulated and abused her, and it is very, very well drawn out. And I could see some people arguing the movie doesn't need to go further than that, and all of that stuff is really deeply felt, I think. So despite the fact that I think it could have uglied itself up even a little bit more, but beyond the writerly perversities, which I think are really effectively dirty.
Yeah, really good.
This is still very dark and scary when it needs to be. And watching these characters plot the brutal downfall of others in real time and watch people either lose themselves or, in the case of Susie, self-actualize in this underworld that's no longer just on the streets, but now, in the high rises. Yeah. With JJ and in journalism and politics, and the entire film is very cynical and witty and slimy, and all of the things that make up a great noir. So very high 4 for me.
I will also go with the very high 4. You all had mentioned the writerliness, so I did want to call attention to a couple things that came up while I was listening to commentary tracks and looking for all the information I could find. But James Nairmore wrote a book on Sweet Smell of Success. He also does the Criterion commentary. And he drew my attention to something about what makes the dialogue so effective. And he refers to it as ricochet dialogue, which is that usually in a scene, like if you have a scene with Lancaster and with Sydney, there's usually like a side character somewhere that's also participating in the conversation, so that while they're talking, like their attention will be drawn away and they'll shoot something to like the person next to them and then go back to the conversation at hand. And like the conversation ping pongs that way. And once that was brought to my attention, I couldn't help but notice that like almost every scene is structured that way. Even scenes where they're just interacting with like other side characters, there will be another side character that will come in and interject somewhere. And I found that such like a fascinating like way to block a scene, but also I wanted to bring attention to one of the like a lot of this like the structure and everything was by Lehman, who we'd mentioned earlier, but a lot of the dialogue, almost all of it, was rewritten by the Broadway writer Clifford Odets. And apparently, like, that was such an intense process that, like, it took him 4 months to rewrite the dialogue. And usually he would just hand them pages from his typewriter and they would film them that day because they were in such a crunch. So I feel like a lot of that frantic pace in the dialogue comes through on, like, just the process of he is just giving them a page. Like, this is what I have right now. Go and do it real fast.
Yeah,
so I think that really comes through. I enjoy the. I agree. I enjoy the speed and intensity of those scenes. So yeah, I would say wonderful performances from Curtis and Lancaster. Even if they were not enjoyed at the time, I think history has proven their initial instincts right. I do like how dirty this movie is, and honestly, I kind of enjoy that the stakes aren't necessarily life or death, so to speak.
It does kind of make the scenes like with Rita that much grosser, just because he's willing to do something so disgusting for something kind of small.
Yeah,
in a way. So I could see that. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think that this is a very true noir experience, even without the murder angles, just because like it is just about like the absolute downfalls of like Western society and that pursuit of capital. The sweet smell of success, it amounts to shit. Like it's nothing. Like
shit and blood.
Shit and blood. Yeah,
it doesn't smell good. That's for sure.
But yeah, it is a fantastic movie. James Wong House, street cinematography, the writing, the directing, just everything is just a perfect confluence of events. And I think it's a timeless movie, and I can never get tired of it.
Hell yeah. Well, I think that's going to wrap it up. But before we wrap it up, I wanted to throw in something we didn't mention, but is written in my quotes here because I just have to bring it up. Not one, but 2 lines about pretzels in this film.
Oh, yeah.
Very important to bring those up because what is it? It's Tony Curtis says it at one point where he says, "If you're funny, I'm a pretzel." And then someone else says it to JJ at one point where he says, "You've got more twists than a barrel of pretzels." And that's just a writerly tick. He was
holding one up that day.
Yeah, I was like, do you know what? What was the guy's name that you just said, Casey? He was eating pretzels that day.
Clifford Odets was eating some pretzels.
He was writing it. And it made it into the script twice. Incredible.
That's so funny.
But yeah, no, very good film. And I think that wraps it up for everything this week. That was The Night in the City and Sweet Smell of Success. Thanks so much, Casey, for bringing these films with you and for joining us this week.
Don't remove the gangplank, Sleazoids. You might want to get back on board.
Yeah. If you've got anything to plug while you're here, feel free to do so, even if it's just your Twitter account where you're talking about things.
Sure. Thank you for having me. You can follow me on Twitter at MinovskyArticle. I post about things I like, and sometimes other people find enjoyment in that. Otherwise, if you happen to listen to this episode because you followed me on Twitter and came to this podcast, Sleazoids is a great show. And I recommend you listen to as much of it as possible.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. For our listeners, we're going to be back in 1 week's time, wrapping up Noirvember with a little trip over to Japan. We're going to be talking about Takeshi Kitano for the first time on this show, and we're going to be talking about 2 crime films by him that I've wanted to talk about for a while. We're going to talk about one, Violent Cop from 1989, and Sonatine, which both
bona fide classics.
Yeah, I'm so excited.
So patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast. That's next week's bonus episode. Look forward to that. And then the week after that, we are going to be back with a special guest, and we're going to be talking about 2 films that I haven't seen. Our guest very much laughed when I agreed to do it because they were like, "You're going to regret that you just agreed to do this double feature."
I love it already.
And you only agreed to do it because you don't know what they are. Disclosure, 1994, directed by Barry Levinson, and Jade, 1995, directed by William Friedkin. From what I understand, these are 90s, possibly erotic thrillers of some kind.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I know Jade is, but I don't know the twist.
Apparently, both have very, very twisted gender politics to them.
Interesting.
That our guest is very excited to get into.
Gonna get us in trouble. Let's do this.
We're gonna get in trouble 2 weeks from now. But yeah, that'll wrap it up for everything this week. Thanks so much for listening, and keep it sleazy.
Keep it sleazy.